reborn as Sinbad. This crazy bastard showed up and vaporized All for One into dust while making Mount Lady and Midnight wet on live TV. No Quirk, nah. 7 Djinn and pure fuck you energy. Izuku doesn't hero, he reigns, breaks chains, and makes every villain regret existing. This story's unhinged gold.
Welcome, legends, to Chronos Recom. I wrote this story myself, so if you have any suggestions or what-ifs you want to see, drop it in the comments below. Also, just wanted to let you know I've got a Patreon set up now for anyone who wants to support the channel directly. You can get early access to stories, submit direct fan requests, and get exclusive content. It's totally optional, but if you want to help keep these stories coming, check it out. Links in the description. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that bell so you never miss an upload. Let's dive into this story.
Before the glowing baby in Chinking City changed the trajectory of human evolution, before the world learned the word Quirk and restructured civilization around it, towering monolithic structures called dungeons rose from the earth. They appeared in deserts, in oceans, in the hearts of mountain ranges, massive stone pillars reaching into the clouds, adorned with symbols older than recorded language. Pro-heroes sent teams inside. Those teams never came back. Governments built walls around them. The public forgot they existed. Schools stopped teaching about them. The dungeons became background noise. Ancient mysteries best left alone by a world too busy worshipping people who could shoot fire from their hands. Izuku Midoriya was 4 years old when the doctor told his mother he would never develop a quirk. He was 4 years old when the world told him he was worthless. He was 4 years old when the dreams started. They came every night. Visions of endless blue seas, golden palaces, labyrinths filled with fire and monsters and impossible geometry. A man standing at the top of the world with 7 kings bowing before him. A man with wild hair and a smile that owned everything it touched. The man looked back at Izuku through the dream and said one word. Rise. By the time Izuku was 10, the dreams had become memories. Full, vivid, complete memories of a life lived thousands of years ago in a world that existed alongside this one in ways modern science refused to acknowledge. The man's name was Sinbad. High King of the 7 Seas, Conqueror of 7 Dungeons, Master of 7 Djinn. A singularity, a being around in the flow of fate itself bent and restructured. Izuku understood what he was by 12. He was Sinbad, reborn. The soul, the instincts, the ambition, the connection to the Rook. The white birds of fate that danced at the edges of his vision, invisible to everyone else, pouring their energy into him like a river feeding an ocean. At 14, Izuku Midoriya told his mother he loved her, walked out the front door of their apartment in Musutafu, and disappeared. He walked straight to the nearest dungeon. The wall around it was 40 feet of reinforced concrete, topped with razor wire and government surveillance. Izuku looked at it the way a man looks at a speed bump. He climbed it in under a minute, dropped to the other side, placed his palm against the ancient stone, and the entrance opened for him like it had been waiting. He walked inside. 2 years passed. Izuku Midoriya filed missing persons reports. The police searched, heroes investigated. Nobody found anything. The boy was gone. And then, on a spring morning 2 years later, a 16-year-old walked back into Musutafu, and the city felt different. The air itself felt different. Birds gathered wherever he walked, white birds that nobody else seemed to see, swirling around him in patterns that looked almost like celebration. He was taller, broader. His green hair had grown wild and untamed, falling past his ears in waves. His body was carved from 2 years of surviving things that would have killed seasoned pro heroes in their first hour. He wore flowing fabrics in deep blues and whites, gold inlaid jewelry across his wrists and neck and fingers, and boots that had walked through 7 impossible labyrinths and come out the other side carrying their power. 7 metal vessels. 7 Djinn. 7 conquered dungeons. He was 17 now, and he enrolled at UA High School because it sounded like the most entertaining thing he could do with his Tuesday afternoons. But that's getting ahead of the story. Let's go back to the moment the world first met the king. The sludge villain took Bakugo Katsuki on a Thursday afternoon in downtown Musutafu. A living mass of toxic mud wrapped around a screaming teenager, using his body as a hostage and his explosion quirk as a weapon. The street was a war zone. Cars were overturned, storefronts were blown open. Smoke poured from 3 separate fires that the villain's stolen explosions had ignited. The pro-heroes on scene were Matt Lady, 60 feet tall and completely useless in a narrow street, and Midnight, who couldn't deploy her quirk without knocking out the hostage alongside the villain. Death Arms stood at the barricade with his fists clenched and his jaw locked because he had already tried once and the villain had detonated Bakugo's palms in his face. Kamui Woods was keeping civilians back. Backdraft was fighting the fires. Nobody was saving Bakugo Katsuki. The crowd pressed against the police line. Phones were out. People were recording. Some were crying. A kid was dying in real time, and every single hero on that street was frozen, and you could see it in their faces. The shame, the helplessness, the mathematical reality that any move they made risked the hostage's life. 40 seconds had passed since the last rescue attempt. Bakugo's struggles were getting weaker. The mud was creeping higher up his face, and then the barricade shifted. Someone walked through it. Walked through it the way you walk through a doorway. Because that's all it was to him. A doorway. A cop reached for his arm, and the teenager moved past the hand without slowing, without acknowledging it, the way wind moves past a street sign. Izuku Midoriya stepped onto the battlefield in full adventurer's garb. Flowing blue coat over a white tunic, golden bracelets catching the afternoon sun, green hair wild around a face that carried absolute zero concern about the monster, 50 feet in front of him. He was smiling. Midnight saw him first. She moved to intercept, her arm already reaching. "Civilian, you need to get back behind the..." Izuku turned his head toward her. The smile widened. His eyes traveled from her face down and back up in a way that was so unhurried, so completely unbothered by the apocalypse happening behind him, that Midnight's professional composure cracked for half a second. "A tragedy for such beautiful women to scowl," Izuku said, his voice carrying over the chaos with a warmth that had no business existing in a combat zone. "Allow me to clear the air, my ladies." He kept walking. Mount Lady, even at 60 feet, looked down at him with her mouth slightly open. Something about the way he moved, the absolute ownership of every step, the way the air around him seemed heavier, made her shrink down to normal height without consciously deciding to. She wanted a better look. Izuku drew a broadsword from beneath his coat. The blade was ornate, ancient, and thrumming with an energy that made the hair stand up on the arms of every person within 30 feet. The sky changed. Clouds pulled together from nothing. Clear blue afternoon vanished under a rolling mass of thunderheads gathered directly above the street in seconds. The temperature dropped. Static electricity crackled across every metal surface in a 2-block radius. Car alarms went off in sequence like dominoes. Izuku raised his left arm. The golden bracelet on his wrist blazed with light. "Djinn of Wrath and Heroes, dwell in my body." The transformation was instantaneous. Blue scales erupted across his skin like armor being forged in real time. A reptilian tail swept out behind him, thick and powerful. His hair went electric, standing on end, crackling with raw blue lightning that danced between the strands. His eyes blazed. His body grew 3 inches taller, broader, more powerful. Lightning lived on every surface of his new form, arcing and snapping against the air. Djinn Equip, bail. The crowd went silent. Every single person, every camera, every hero. The silence was physical. It had weight. Izuku looked at the sludge villain. The villain looked back with wide, terrified eyes, because whatever this was, whatever had just appeared on the street in front of it, every survival instinct the creature possessed was screaming a single word: run. Too late. Izuku snapped his fingers. Bararak. A divine lightning bolt descended from the storm above. It was beautiful. It was blue-white and absolute, thick as a telephone pole, and it struck the sludge villain with the precision of a scalpel and the force of a natural disaster. The bolt pierced the mud creature from top to bottom and vaporized it. Every molecule of toxic sludge within the strike zone ceased to exist. The bolt burned so hot that the water content in the villain's body flash-boiled, and the resulting steam explosion blew the remaining residue off Bakugo's body in a clean wave. The lightning touched nothing else. The concrete beneath the villain's position was scorched black in a perfect circle. The buildings on either side were untouched. Bakugo, covered in dissipating steam and freed from his prison, began to fall, and Izuku was already there. He reverted to human form mid-stride. The scales receded, the tail vanished, the lightning died. By the time his hand caught Bakugo by the collar, he was just a 17-year-old in expensive clothes with wild green hair and a devastating grin. He held Bakugo at arm's length, one-handed, like a man holding a jacket he was considering purchasing. "You're welcome," Izuku said. Bakugo's eyes focused. His brain processed what had just happened. The imprisonment, the suffocation, the absolute humiliation of being saved. His face went through 6 emotions in 2 seconds. Fury 1. "Who the hell do you think you?" Izuku released his collar. Bakugo hit the ground on his back and the words died in his throat because Izuku had already turned away from him, had already dismissed him, was already walking back toward the barricade with the posture of a man leaving a stage after a standing ovation. The crowd erupted. It was volcanic. Hundreds of people screaming at once, phones held high, videos that would hit 10 million views before sunset, people grabbing strangers by the shoulders and shaking them because they needed someone else to confirm what they just saw was real. Izuku walked through the noise like it was background music. His path took him past midnight, and he paused. She was staring at him. Her eyes were wide. Her whip hung, forgotten, at her side. Her chest was rising and falling in a way that had nothing to do with combat exertion. Izuku took her hand. He brought it to his lips. "Midnight-san. Your beauty is the one disaster on this street I find myself helpless against." Midnight, the R-rated hero, the woman whose entire brand was built on composure and control and sensuality, turned pink. Actually, pink. Her lips parted, but words failed to materialize. Mount Lady pushed past 2 police officers to get closer. She was staring at Izuku with zero pretense of professional interest. Her eyes were running across his shoulders, his jawline, his arms. She made absolutely no effort to hide it. If anything, she was leaning forward. "Who? What? How old are you?" Mount Lady managed. 17, Izuku said pleasantly. "But I assure you, my lady, I have lived more than one lifetime." He winked. Mount Lady made a sound that was going to haunt her PR team for weeks. In the crowd, pressed between civilians, loafed a skeletal man with sunken eyes and a frame that looked like it might collapse under a strong breeze. Watched the entire scene. Toshinori Yagi, All Might, had been 30 seconds from transforming and resolving the crisis himself when the boy appeared. He hadn't needed to. He hadn't been needed at all. All Might watched the 17-year-old with Djinn bracelets, an ancient power, and a presence that made pro heroes forget how to speak. And he understood something that changed the landscape of everything he thought he knew about the future. This was something beyond a quirk, beyond one for all. Beyond anything the current system had a framework for. A king had arrived, and the world was going to rearrange itself around him, whether it was ready or not. Bakugo Katsuki remained on the ground for 6 full seconds after Izuku walked away. He stared at the sky. His palms crackled with residual explosions that went nowhere. His teeth were clenched so hard his jaw ached. He had been saved, effortlessly, by someone who hadn't even looked at him long enough to consider him worth a full conversation. That feeling, that insignificance, was going to eat him alive. The UA entrance exam happened 3 days later. Izuku strolled into the orientation hall like he owned the building. His posture said it. His clothes said it. He'd swapped the full adventurer garb for something slightly more urban, but the golden bracelets remained, the necklace remained, the ring remained. Last year, his metal vessels went everywhere he did. He wore a fitted black jacket over a white shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearms, and somehow managed to make a school exam feel like a royal court appearance. The orientation hall was packed. 300 examinees, all nervous, all buzzing with energy, all trying to figure out who their competition was. Izuku scanned the room from the entrance with the expression of a man surveying a buffet. Interested, amused, never overwhelmed. His eyes found her in 4 seconds. Momo Yaoyorozu sat in the 3rd row, back straight, legs crossed, hands folded in her lap with the kind of posture that came from a lifetime of etiquette training. Her eyes were tracking the room with a sharpness that told Izuku everything he needed to know. She was analyzing, cataloging, running calculations about every person she could see. She was the smartest person in this room, and she knew it, and she carried that knowledge with a composure that most people never achieve. Izuku smiled, a real smile. A smile that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with recognition. He crossed the room in a straight line. He did not zigzag around other examinees. They moved for him. They moved without being asked, without conscious thought, because something about his trajectory made the human brain decide that getting out of the way was the correct option. He slid into the empty seat beside Momo Yaoyorozu. She turned her head. Dark eyes met green ones. Her gaze was steady, evaluating, professional. Izuku took her hand. She blinked. Her lips parted, probably to ask what he thought he was doing, but Izuku was already bringing her knuckles to his lips. The kiss was light, warm, unhurried. "I have conquered 7 dungeons," Izuku said, his voice low enough that only she could hear it, "but none of them held a treasure quite as breathtaking as you." He released her hand, but held her gaze. "Izuku Midoriya, at your eternal service." The composure fractured. Momo Yaoyorozu, who had maintained perfect emotional discipline through 15 years of elite upbringing, private tutoring, media appearances, and quirk demonstrations, turned red from her collarbones to the tips of her ears. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Her hand remained exactly where he had left it, hovering in midair like her brain had forgotten to send the signal to lower it. You can't just... She was brilliant and articulate, and every word she tried to form collapsed before it reached her lips. She looked away, looked back, made the mistake of meeting his eyes again, and found him still wearing that smile, the one that said he had all the time in the world and intended to spend every second of it right here. "Yaoyorozu Momo," she managed finally, and her voice only wobbled slightly. "Please refrain from looking at me like that while I'm trying to focus." Izuku leaned back in his chair with the satisfaction of a man who had just won a war without drawing a weapon. "As my lady commands." Momo spent the rest of orientation staring at the presentation screen with a focus that bordered on aggressive, her cheeks never fully returning to their normal color. Every time Izuku shifted in his seat beside her, she tensed. Every time he breathed in away, she could hear her pen grip tightened. She was fully aware of his presence in a way she had never been aware of another human being, and she resented it, and she was fascinated by it, and she could not stop the warmth spreading through her chest, no matter how many logical arguments she deployed against it. Present Mike's voice boomed from the stage, explaining the practical exam, urban combat zones, villain robots, point values. Izuku listened with one ear. His focus was on the metal necklace against his collarbone. The practical exam started 20 minutes later. The examinees gathered at the gates of their assigned zones, massive fake cities built for destruction. Izuku stood at the front of Zone B's crowd. Behind him, he could hear nervous chatter, people stretching, someone doing breathing exercises. A round-faced girl with brown hair stood near him, bouncing on her heels with visible nerves. Uraraka Ochako. She caught his eye and gave him a shaky smile. "Good luck in there," she said. "I'm super nervous, but..." "Luck has nothing to do with what happens next," Izuku said gently. He gave her a nod that carried genuine warmth. "But I appreciate the kindness. You'll do well." The gate opened. Everyone surged forward. 300 examinees charging into a city filled with villain bots, scrambling to accumulate points before the clock ran out. Competition. Chaos. Panic. Izuku walked. He touched the necklace. The metal grew warm beneath his fingertips, and the rook around him shifted, the white birds swirling in a pattern that built towards something massive. Djinn of falsehood and prestige. Velafor. The transformation swept through him like a blizzard incarnate. His body shifted. White fur erupted across his skin. Multiple foxtails bloomed behind him in a cascade of ethereal snow. His features sharpened into something feral and beautiful and ancient. His eyes went ice blue. Cold radiated from him in waves that frosted the concrete beneath his feet with every step. He looked across the entire zone. Robots were converging from every direction. 1-pointers, 2-pointers, 3-pointers, dozens of them, maybe 100, all targeting examinees who were fighting desperately for individual kills. Izuku raised one hand. Garu for Zairu. A howling blizzard exploded outward from his palm. It moved in a sphere, expanding in every direction simultaneously, engulfing the entire combat zone in a wave of supernatural cold that froze the molecular kinetic energy of everything mechanical in its path. The cold was beyond temperature. It was the absence of motion itself. Every robot in Zone B, every single one, from the one-pointers in the alleys to the three-pointers on the rooftops, locked in place mid-stride, mid-swing, mid-charge. Frozen in perfect crystalline stillness, their joints encased in ice that had formed at the atomic level, the entire zone went quiet. 137 robots. Every point value available. All frozen. All his. Izuku reverted to human form, hands in his pockets, and continued walking through the frozen city at the same pace he'd entered. Behind him, the other examinees stood in absolute stillness. The robots they'd been fighting, the robots they'd been running from, the robots they'd been desperately strategizing against, all gone. All frozen. All ended in a single breath by a single person who hadn't raised his voice or broken his stride. Uraraka stood 10 feet from a three-pointer she'd been about to touch. The robot was now a frozen sculpture, suspended in the exact pose it had been attacking from. Her jaw hung open. Her brain was running the numbers, and the numbers refused to make sense. Ida Tenya had been mid-sprint toward a cluster of two-pointers, his engines blazing. He stopped. His glasses were fogging from the residual cold. He removed them, wiped them on his shirt, replaced them, and stared at the frozen landscape with an expression that suggested his entire worldview was being renovated without his permission. A blonde boy with a naval laser, Aoyama, had been posing dramatically before firing at a one-pointer. He was still in the pose. The one-pointer was frozen solid 3 feet from his face. He looked at it, looked at the frozen city, looked at Izuku's retreating back. Mon Dieu, he whispered. Bakugo Katsuki was in Zone A. He couldn't see what happened. He felt it. The temperature drop reached his zone as a sudden chill that made his palms stutter for half a second. He looked toward Zone B and saw the cloud of frozen mist hanging above it like a crown, his teeth ground together hard enough to crack enamel. In the observation room, the UA faculty watched their monitors with expressions ranging from stunned silence to outright disbelief. Principal Nezu set down his teacup. His paw remained frozen in midair for 3 full seconds. "Well," he said eventually, "I believe we've found our top admission." President Mike leaned forward in his chair so far he nearly fell out of it. "Did he just... the whole zone? The whole zone?" Aizawa Shuda stood against the back wall with his arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were locked on the green-haired boy walking through the frozen city like a man strolling through a garden. "What is he?" someone asked. Nobody had an answer. Izuku Midoriya scored first place in the UA entrance exam with 137 villain points. Second place had 42. The gap between first and second was the gap between a king and everyone else. Uncrossable, absolute, and embarrassing for anyone who bothered to measure it. He was admitted to Class 1A. The first day of classes at UA began with Aizawa Shuda standing at the front of the room in his sleeping bag, looking at 20 students with the expression of a man who would rather be literally anywhere else. "Quirk assessment test," he said. "We're going outside. Whoever places last gets expelled." The class moved to the field. 20 students lined up. Aizawa rattled off the exercises. 50-meter dash, grip strength, standing long jump, sustained sideways steps, ball throw, sit-ups, toe touch, distance run. Izuku stood among them, looking faintly amused by the entire concept. Momo was there. She caught his eye and immediately looked away, but the pink dusting across her cheeks betrayed her completely. Izuku smiled at her back. She could feel it. Her shoulders rose half an inch. The assessment proceeded. Students performed. Bakugo launched a ball with an explosion 105.2 meters. He grinned like a wolf. Aizawa's scarf suddenly snapped taut. His eyes blazed red, his hair lifted, erasure activated, sweeping the entire class. Every student with a visible quirk felt the suppression. Momo's hands stopped mid-creation. Todoroki's ice retreated into his skin. Ashido's acid dried up. Kaminari's sparks died. Izuku's bracelets kept glowing. The gold shimmered against his wrists. Warm, bright, completely unaffected. The necklace at his collarbone pulsed once. A heartbeat of power that answered to nothing on this field. Aizawa's eyes were locked on him. Red, burning, full erasure at maximum output directed entirely at one student. The glow from Izuku's vessels didn't flicker. He turned his head toward Aizawa, and the rest of the class held their breath because they had all felt the erasure hit them, and they could all see that it was doing absolutely nothing to the boy in the gold jewelry. "My power comes from the earth and the sky, Aizawa-sensei," Izuku said. His tone was respectful, warm even, but underneath the warmth was something immovable. "Your eyes hold no sway over the Rook." Aizawa held the gaze for 5 seconds. 10. His eyes burned red and his hair floated, and his erasure, the ability that had neutralized villains, subdued rogue heroes, and maintained order in his classroom for a decade, accomplished absolutely nothing against the golden light on Izuku Midoriya's wrists. He blinked. His hair fell. Erasure deactivated. "Noted," Aizawa said. His voice was flat, but something behind his expression had shifted, a recalculation happening in real time. The class exhaled as one, 20 people breathing out simultaneously because they'd all been holding it without realizing. Kaminari Denki leaned toward Kirishima and whispered, "Bro, did Aizawa-sensei just lose?" Kirishima's grin was enormous. "Bro, I think he did." Momo pressed her fingers to her temple and took a slow breath. She was looking at Izuku with an expression that combined academic fascination with something significantly warmer, and she was fully aware of the combination, and she was choosing to ignore it because acknowledging it in public would end her. Izuku completed every assessment exercise with scores that made the digital displays stutter. His ball throw, using a flick of Focalor's wind, registered at infinity. The display actually broke. It showed a sideways 8 and then flickered and went blank. Aizawa stared at the broken display. He wrote something in his notebook. His pen stopped moving halfway through a word. He stared at what he'd written. He crossed it out. He closed the notebook. "You're all dismissed," he said, and walked away with the energy of a man who needed to lie down. The battle trial came 2 days later. All Might. In his muscled form, cape billowing, teeth gleaming, assigned the teams. Heroes versus villains. Indoor combat. The building was a 5-story training structure filled with hallways and rooms and tactical options. The matchups were randomized. Izuku was assigned as a hero. His opponent on the villain team, Bakugo Katsuki. The class went rigid when the names appeared on the screen. Everyone remembered the sludge villain incident. The videos had 400 million views combined. They all knew these two had history, or rather, they knew that Izuku had history with Bakugo. The same way a lion has history with a mouse it once passed in a field, Bakugo's reaction was volcanic. His palms crackled. His face twisted into something between fury and hunger. He'd been waiting for this. Every second since the sludge incident, every moment of orientation where Izuku's name was whispered by other students, every clip he couldn't avoid seeing on social media, it had been building, compressing, waiting for this exact opportunity. Finally, Bakugo snarled, "I'm gonna blow you apart." Izuku looked at him from across the monitoring room with mild interest, the way a man looks at whether he finds vaguely notable. "I look forward to your attempt," he said pleasantly. The exercise began. Bakugo and his partner, Ida Tenya, set up on the 5th floor with the fake bomb. Or rather, Ida set up with the fake bomb. Bakugo lasted approximately 40 seconds in the planning phase before his patience evaporated, and he launched himself down the stairwell to find Izuku personally. Izuku's partner was Uraraka. She stood beside him at the building entrance, looking up at him with wide eyes. "So, what's the plan?" she asked. "Walk inside, wait for him to come to me, end it." Izuku gave her a reassuring smile. "You should stay here, Uraraka-san. This will be brief." But he was already through the door. Izuku walked the hallways of the training building with his hands in his pockets. His footsteps echoed. He made no effort to be stealthy, no effort to hide his position. He wanted to be found. He wanted this to happen. The ambush came on the 3rd floor. Bakugo exploded through a wall to Izuku's right. A full-power breach, concrete and rebar flying, followed immediately by a right hook, backed by a detonation that would have caved in a steel door. He was screaming. He was always screaming. "I'll kill you! Izuku sidestepped the punch. The explosion roared past his face, close enough to heat his skin, and he didn't flinch. His expression remained the same, mild, faintly amused, waiting. Bakugo pivoted, left palm forward, explosion. The hallway filled with fire and smoke and noise. He followed with a right palm to where Izuku's midsection should be. Another detonation, point blank, maximum force. The smoke cleared. Izuku stood in the same spot. His jacket was singed at the edges, but his body was untouched. 7 dungeons had forged him into something beyond what explosions could damage. His skin had absorbed forces that would compress diamonds. Bakugo's blasts were warm air. "Is that all?" Izuku asked. Bakugo's face went white, then red, then a shade of purple that suggested his blood pressure was approaching medical emergency levels. "I'll blast your face off! Izuku touched the ring on his middle finger. "Djinn of sound. Zepar." The transformation was small this time, minimal. His form shifted, shrinking slightly, his features becoming impish, his belly extending. But his eyes remained the same, focused, amused. The eyes of someone who had already decided how this ended. Bakugo charged. Full power. Everything he had. Both palms forward, explosions chaining into each other, turning the hallway into a tunnel of fire aimed directly at Izuku's face. Izuku opened his mouth. The shriek was beyond sound. It was resonance, a frequency that bypassed the ears entirely and entered the brain through pathways that had no defense. It went through Bakugo's explosions like they were tissue paper. It went through his skull like his skull was made of air. It found the center of his consciousness and wrapped around it. Bakugo stopped mid-charge. His explosions died. His arms fell to his sides. His eyes were wide and empty. The pupils blown, the fury gone, replaced by nothing. Izuku raised one finger. Sleep. Bakugo's eyes rolled back. His body went limp, starting from the crown of his head downward, shoulders slumping, knees buckling, until he hit the concrete floor face first, with a sound that echoed through the building. Unconscious. Completely. Absolutely. 10 seconds. Start to finish. Izuku reverted to human form, stepped over Bakugo's unconscious body, and walked to the 5th floor, where Ida was standing alone with the fake bomb, having heard the explosions stop and the silence that followed. Ida barely had time to take a defensive stance before Izuku was past him, hand on the bomb. "Hero team wins." All Might's voice came over the intercom. He sounded strained, like he was trying very hard to sound professional while processing something unprecedented. In the monitoring room, Class 1A had stopped breathing. Kirishima's jaw was on the floor, literally hanging open, his sharp teeth visible. 10 seconds. That was 10 seconds. Kaminari had both hands on his head. He didn't even touch him. He screamed and Bakugo just... Ashido grabbed Sero's arm with both hands and was shaking him. "What was that? What was that? What?" Todoroki Shoto stood at the back of the room with his arms crossed, his heterochromatic eyes fixed on the screen, showing Izuku's face. He said nothing, but his jaw was tight and his right hand, the ice hand, was gripping his own forearm hard enough to leave marks. Momo stood beside the central monitor. She had one hand pressed to her temple and her eyes were closed. She was breathing in a pattern that suggested she was actively managing her heart rate. When she opened her eyes, they went directly to the screen, showing Izuku walking through the building, and something in her expression softened against her will. "He's extraordinary," she said. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. The realization that she had said it out loud made the color rise in her cheeks immediately. Jiro Kyoka, standing beside her with earphone jacks hanging loose, grinned sideways. "You're doing a great job hiding it." Momo's composure held for exactly 1 second, then crumbled into mortification. She turned away and pressed both palms to her face. All Might stood in the monitoring room with his arms crossed, watching the replay of Izuku's Zepar transformation for the 3rd time. His smile was still in place. It was always in place. But behind it, behind the facade of confidence, Toshinori Yagi was running calculations about a world that suddenly contained someone who could end fights with a single word. Aizawa appeared in the doorway. He looked at All Might. All Might looked at him. "His power can't be erased," Aizawa said. It was a statement. "No," All Might agreed. "And he conquered 7 of those structures that are supposed to be impossible." "Yes." Aizawa was silent for a moment. "He's going to change everything." All Might nodded. "I believe he already has." The USJ attack happened on a Wednesday. Class 1A loaded into the bus for their first off-campus rescue training exercise. 13, the space hero, greeted them at the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, a massive domed facility containing multiple disaster zones designed for rescue practice. Water zones, fire zones, collapse zones, landslide zones. Izuku walked in and his eyes went to the architecture. 7 dungeons had taught him to read spaces the way other people read books. He saw sightlines, choke points, elevated positions, and exit routes in the first 3 seconds. He also saw the warp gate before it opened. The Rooks screamed at him, the white birds, always present at the edge of his vision, scattered in a pattern he recognized. Danger. Imminent. Massive. The black mist erupted at the center of the facility, a swirling vortex of darkness that tore open the fabric of space and began pouring villains into the building like water through a broken dam, dozens of them, then 100, then more. Armed, hostile, flooding every disaster zone, and at the center of the portal 2 figures emerged. The first was thin, hunched, with a face covered in severed hands, Shigaraki Tamura, his posture radiating unstable malice. Beside him stood a towering monstrosity, the Nomu, a bird-brained beast of pure muscle, its brain exposed, its body engineered specifically for one purpose. The anti-All Might weapon, Shigaraki scratched his neck and scanned the students. Kill them all, find the symbol of peace. The class scattered. Aizawa launched himself into the crowd of villains, scarf flying, buying time. 13 tried to evacuate the students. The warp gate spread across the building. Students were disappearing, pulled through black mist into separate disaster zones. Kirishima into the collapse zone, Kaminari into the water zone. Ashido, Sero, Todoroki, all separated, all isolated, all surrounded by villains tailored to overwhelm them. Izuku moved through the chaos like a man walking through rain, aware of it, unbothered by it. He gathered the students closest to him, Momo, Jiro, Tsuyu, Mineta, and his voice cut through the panic with the weight of someone who had given commands in far worse situations than this. Momo. She looked at him. Her eyes were wide, but her spine was straight. She was afraid, but she was functional, and Izuku saw that and respected it. "Keep them safe," he said. "I will handle these trespassers." Momo's jaw tightened. She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him he was being reckless. But something in his eyes, something ancient and absolute and completely certain, told her that arguing would be a waste of breath. She nodded. Izuku turned toward the center of the facility, toward Shigaraki, toward the Nomu, toward the horde of villains flooding the building. He touched the silver bracelet on his left wrist. The air pressure in the entire USJ dropped. Every person in the facility, student, trop, villain, hero, felt their ears pop simultaneously. The change was massive, physical, undeniable, like the building had just been lifted 10,000 feet in altitude in a single heartbeat. Djinn, of rule and submission, Focalor. His hair grew. It cascaded past his shoulders in seconds, turning from green to something deeper, something that caught the light in ways that shouldn't be possible. Feathers erupted from his arms, long, sweeping, black as midnight oil. His body lifted off the ground. He rose 10 feet, then 20, hovering above the facility floor, with an authority that made gravity itself seem like a suggestion he'd chosen to ignore. He looked down at the Nomu. The Nomu looked up at him. Shigaraki's scratching stopped. His hand hovered at his neck. For the first time since he'd walked through that portal, his posture changed. A slight lean backward, an unconscious retreat from something his instincts were telling him to fear. "What? What is that?" Shigaraki whispered. The Nomu launched itself upward. Engineered muscles fired at maximum output, propelling the creature toward Izuku with speed that cracked the concrete floor beneath its departure point. Its fist was cocked back, a punch designed to challenge All Might at 100%. A punch that could level buildings. Izuku didn't move. "You rely on absorbing blunt force," he said, his voice carrying across the entire facility with perfect clarity despite the chaos below. "Let's see you absorb the sky." Foraz Zora, twin black tornadoes erupted from his palms. They spiraled toward the Nomu with a sound like the atmosphere itself was being torn in half. These were not blunt weapons. These were a million simultaneous cutting edges, microscopic blades of compressed wind working at the cellular level. They did not push. They did not bludgeon. They shredded. The first tornado hit the Nomu's extended fist, and the fist stopped existing. The regeneration kicked in, tissue rebuilding, cells multiplying, but the tornado didn't stop. It kept cutting, faster than regeneration could rebuild. The second tornado wrapped around the Nomu's torso and began dismantling it layer by layer, skin, muscle, bone, all separated at the molecular level. Shock absorption meant nothing. There was nothing to absorb. This wasn't force. This was division. The Nomu came apart in 3 seconds. What was left of it rained down in pieces so small they were more particle than matter. The villains below went silent, every single one of them. 100 criminals who had walked into this building expecting to murder children went quiet at the same moment because they had all just watched the anti-All Might weapon, the thing Shigaraki called their trump card, get erased from existence by a floating teenager. Izuku descended. He landed in front of Shigaraki without urgency, his hair still long and dark, the feathers still spreading from his arms. He raised one hand. A sphere of compressed black wind formed in his palm, spinning, screaming with contained destruction, close enough to Shigaraki's face that the villain could feel it pulling at his skin. Izuku's eyes locked onto Shigaraki's through the gaps in the hands covering his face. Leave my kingdom. Shigaraki stared at the sphere of wind, at the boy behind it, at the complete absence of hesitation or mercy in those green eyes. Kurogiri, Shigaraki said. His voice cracked. The warp gate opened behind him immediately. The black mist swallowed Shigaraki, swallowed the remaining villains who were smart enough to run, and closed with a sound like reality sealing a wound. The USJ went quiet. Izuku released the Djinn Equip. His hair shortened, the feathers receded. He landed on human feet in human form and turned to face the students he'd just protected. They were staring at him, all of them. Suyu had her finger against her lip. Her wide eyes were wider than usual, which was saying something. Midoriya-chan, what are you? Kirishima had emerged from the collapse zone just in time to see the end. He was on his knees. His shark-toothed grin was enormous, and his eyes were wet. That was the manliest thing I've ever seen! Kaminari was lying flat on his back, staring at the ceiling, having apparently decided that standing up was beyond his current capabilities. Jiro had her earphone jacks wrapped around her own arms like she was physically holding herself together. Todoroki stood at the edge of the water zone with ice melting on his right side. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes tracked Izuku with an intensity that spoke of reassessment, fundamental, ground-up reassessment. And Momo. Momo stood where Izuku had left her, surrounded by the students she'd protected exactly as he'd asked. Her shield, a massive titanium panel she'd created from her body, was still in her hands. Her breath was coming fast. Her eyes were locked on Izuku with something that went beyond admiration, beyond attraction. She was looking at him the way someone looks at a force they didn't believe could exist in the real world. You handled it, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking against the shield. You told me you would handle it, and you... She let the shield fall. It clanged against the concrete floor. You're real, she said, like she needed to say it out loud to believe it. Izuku crossed the distance between them. He took the hand that was shaking and held it between both of his until the trembling stopped. I will always handle it, he said, low enough that only she could hear. You have my word as a king. Momo's breath caught. Her fingers curled around his, and she didn't pull away. For the first time since they'd met, she didn't fight the pull. She just let herself be held. Behind them, the USJ creaked and groaned with damage. Pro heroes were arriving. Aizawa was on the ground, injured from fighting the Horde before Izuku intervened. All Might was bursting through the entrance a full 90 seconds too late. All Might surveyed the scene. The destroyed Nomu, the fled villains, the untouched students, the 17-year-old in the center of it all, holding a girl's hand like the apocalypse they'd all just survived was already yesterday's news. Young Midoriya, All Might said. His voice was quiet, which was unusual enough that several students turned to look. What happened here? Izuku looked over his shoulder. He smiled. The smile of a man who had just defended his people and felt nothing but satisfaction about it. They came to my kingdom uninvited, All Might. I asked them to leave. All Might stared at him for a long time. Then he laughed, a real laugh, full-bodied and genuine, the laugh of a man who had just seen the future and found it to be in better hands than he'd feared. So you did, my boy. So you did. The UA Sports Festival filled a stadium with 80,000 screaming spectators and a nationwide television broadcast that captured 72% market share. Every hero agency in Japan was watching. Every pro hero with an agency was in the stands. The event was recruitment, entertainment, and spectacle rolled into one. Izuku walked into the arena for the opening ceremony wearing his standard adventurer garb. The bracelets caught the stadium lights. The necklace gleamed. His posture said what it always said. I am here, and you are welcome for it. He spotted Mount Lady in the broadcast booth before the ceremony started. She was doing commentary alongside Present Mike, her hair perfect, her costume doing what it always did. Izuku made eye contact across the stadium, across 50,000 heads, across 100 meters of open air, and blew her a kiss. Mount Lady lost her train of thought on live television. Mid-sentence. Gone. Her mouth kept moving, but words stopped coming out. Present Mike had to cover for her with a prolonged, "Yeah!" while she recovered. She didn't fully recover. Midnight was the referee for the tournament bracket. She stood at the arena floor level, whip in hand, announcing matches with her characteristic flair. When Izuku passed her on his way to the competitor waiting area, he paused. Midnight-san, if I win this tournament, will you have dinner with me? Midnight's whip hand twitched. Her smile went from professional to personal in a heartbeat. You're 17, and already the most interesting man you've met this year. She laughed, a real one, surprised out of her against her will. She pointed her whip at him without menace. Win first, then we'll discuss terms, as my lady commands. In the stands, Endeavor, the number 2 hero, a wall of fire and ambition and barely contained rage, watched Izuku's progression through the first events with narrowing eyes. The obstacle race, the cavalry battle. In both, Izuku participated with the absolute minimum effort required to advance, treating them as warm-ups for the only stage that mattered. The cavalry battle was notable only because Izuku chose Momo as his front rider without hesitation, and she accepted without hesitation, and the entire class noticed both of those facts and the implications thereof. Momo on Izuku's team meant his team had strategy, creation, and brains. But she was also blushing the entire time he held her waist to keep her stable. And the camera caught it, and the broadcast caught it, and Twitter exploded with speculation that the internet would spend the next 6 months arguing about. The tournament bracket arrived. Izuku's path through it was uncomplicated. His first opponents were dispatched with minimal Djinn usage. Physical combat alone, the body forged through 7 dungeons, proving more than sufficient against students who had trained for months rather than years. He moved through the bracket like a hot knife through fog, and every match ended with the same expression on his face. Pleasant, mildly entertained, unsurprised. The semifinals. The crowd was loud. The sun was beginning to set, painting the stadium in gold and orange. Todoroki Shoto stepped into the arena. The silence that fell was anticipatory. Everyone knew about Todoroki, the son of Endeavor, half cold, half hot. The student who had used only his ice throughout the entire festival, fighting with one arm behind his back, waging a war against his father by rejecting everything his left side represented. Izuku watched him walk to his starting position. He studied the tension in Todoroki's shoulders, the lockdown left arm, the ice already forming on his right side, ready to deploy. Izuku recognized chains when he saw them. He'd broken his own chains in the first dungeon he'd ever entered. The chains of being told he was worthless, powerless, nothing. He knew what it looked like when someone was imprisoning themselves. Shoto, Izuku said. Todoroki's eyes snapped to him. This tournament means nothing to me, Izuku continued, but you interest me. His voice carried across the stadium. 80,000 people heard every word. You have the blood of a ruler, but you move like a chained prisoner. Todoroki's jaw tightened. Ice crawled further up his right side. My left side is his, Todoroki said. The words were ground out. I will never use it. Midnight's whip cracked. Begin. Todoroki moved immediately. A wall of ice, massive, towering, filling the arena from floor to sky, surged toward Izuku with enough force to crush anything in its path. It was impressive by any standard. Against anyone else in the bracket, it would have been an instant win. Izuku touched the golden bracelet. Djinn of Wrath and Heroes, Bale. Blue scales. The tail. The lightning across every surface. His hair went wild and electric, standing against the sky, and the temperature in the stadium dropped from the chill of Todoroki's ice, but rose from the static heat of Izuku's transformation. The air couldn't decide what it was doing. The audience couldn't decide if they should cheer or pray. Izuku raised one hand toward the wall of ice. Lightning arced from his palm, a single controlled bolt that shattered the center of the ice wall and sent frozen fragments scattering across the arena like crystal rain. Beautiful. The stadium lights caught the ice particles, and for 1 second the entire arena sparkled. Izuku walked through the gap he'd made. "Your power is your own, Shoto," he said. He kept walking forward. Todoroki sent another wave of ice. Izuku shattered it with another bolt, and another, each time advancing, each time speaking. "Your father did not give you fire. The universe gave you fire. It was yours before he wanted it. It will be yours after he's forgotten." Todoroki was breathing hard. His right side was frosting over. He was reaching his limit on ice alone. His body was slowing. The asymmetry was killing him. "If you want to rule your own life," Izuku said, and his voice filled the entire stadium like he was speaking to 80,000 people and one person simultaneously, "then show me your fire. Show me you are the one who decides what it means." Something broke behind Todoroki's eyes, something that had been locked since he was 5 years old. Something his mother's tears had sealed and his father's ambition had reinforced, and his own pride had maintained. It cracked, it fractured, and then it broke open like a door blown off its hinges. His left side ignited. Fire erupted from Todoroki Shoto with the force of years of suppression, releasing all at once. It flooded the arena floor. It cracked the concrete. It melted the remnants of his own ice in seconds. The heat was enormous. The crowd in the front rows leaned back. The cameras auto-adjusted, and somewhere in the stands, Endeavor rose to his feet with an expression nobody in the stadium could read. Todoroki stood in the center of his own inferno, both sides active, ice and fire, complete for the first time since he decided to be incomplete. His heterochromatic eyes were wide and wet and burning with something that wasn't anger. "Fight me," Todoroki said. His voice shook. "Fight me with everything." Izuku grinned, the grin of a king who had just watched a prince throw off his chains. "With pleasure." Bararak Inkarad Sai, the storm above the stadium, which had been building since Baal's activation, clouds rolling in from all directions, the sky turning electric, answered Izuku's call. A colossal blade of blue lightning formed in the clouds. It was enormous. It was beautiful. It was the kind of thing that made people question whether they were watching a sporting event or a natural disaster. The blade descended. Todoroki's fire rose to meet it, everything he had. Both sides at maximum, ice reinforcing his stance, fire pouring upward in a column that challenged the sky. They met at the center of the arena. The shockwave was apocalyptic. It fractured the stadium floor in every direction. Cracks racing outward like spiderwebs, the concrete buckling, the arena walls groaning. The sound hit the crowd a full second after the visual impact, and 80,000 people flinched simultaneously. Cameras blew out. The broadcast went to static for 3 full seconds before the backup feeds kicked in. When the dust cleared, and it took a long time to clear, Izuku stood at the center of the destruction in full Bale equip, lightning still crackling across his scales, completely untouched. Todoroki was on one knee at the edge of the arena. His ice side was steaming. His fire side was guttering. His body had given everything it had, and it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. But his face was smiling. He was smiling and looking at his left hand, the fire hand, with an expression that said he was seeing himself for the first time in over a decade. "Out of bounds," Midnight announced, her voice slightly breathless. Midoriya Izuku wins. The stadium erupted. It was louder than any moment in the festival's history. 80,000 people screaming because they had just watched something that transcended competition. They had watched one boy break another boy's chains, and they had watched it happen through power so absolute that the concept of losing was never even on the table. Izuku reverted. He walked to Todoroki. He offered his hand. Todoroki looked up at him. "You did that on purpose," he said. "You provoked my fire on purpose. A king recognizes potential," Izuku said. "Yours was being wasted. I found that offensive." Todoroki took his hand. Izuku pulled him to his feet. "Thank you," Todoroki said. "Don't thank me. Rule yourself. That's thanks enough." In the stands, Endeavor was still on his feet. His flames were high, burning with a complicated mixture of vindication and something else, something he couldn't name. Something that had nothing to do with his plans and everything to do with watching his son choose fire on his own terms, through his own will, because a stranger had cared enough to challenge him. The finals were academic. Izuku's remaining opponents fell with the efficiency the audience had come to expect. The gold medal ceremony was brief. Izuku stood on the podium, first place, the medal around his neck catching the evening light. The stadium was still buzzing. The cameras were still rolling. He found Momo in the stands. Third row from the floor, her seat right where he knew she'd be. She was looking at him, had been looking at him since his fight with Todoroki, since she'd watched him break someone's chains for the sole purpose of seeing them fly free. Izuku winked. Momo held her composure for exactly 1 second. Her lips pressed together. Her chin lifted. The very picture of dignity and poise. Then her face softened, and she smiled back at him. A real smile. Unguarded, warm, full of something she was done pretending she could ignore. The cameras caught it. The broadcast caught it. Social media caught it. And by tomorrow morning, every fan account in Japan would have screenshots of Izuku Midoriya winking at Momo Yaoyorozu, and Momo Yaoyorozu smiling like she just found something she'd been looking for without knowing she was searching. In the broadcast booth, Lady watched the exchange on her monitor. She sighed, long, dramatic, full of theatrical loss. "He's 17, she muttered. "You said that already," Present Mike bellowed into his microphone. "I'm reminding myself." Midnight, still on the arena floor, watched Izuku descend from the podium with a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. When he passed her, he leaned close. "About that dinner, Midnight-san. You won," she admitted, "but I think there's someone who should get that dinner before me." Her eyes flicked toward Momo in the stands. Izuku followed her gaze. His expression warmed. "You may be right. I'm always right about these things." Midnight tapped his shoulder with her whip. "Go get her, King." He laughed, genuine and warm, and then he walked toward the stands. 3 weeks after the sports festival, Izuku asked Momo to dinner. He did it during class, in front of everyone. He stood up from his desk, crossed the room to hers, and said, with complete composure and at full speaking volume, "Momo, have dinner with me tonight. I know a place that serves food worthy of your company, though nothing on the menu will be as exquisite as the woman across the table." The class imploded. Kaminari fell out of his chair. Ashido screamed at a frequency only dogs should hear. Kirishima was slamming his fist on his desk and yelling manly on repeat. Mineta was crying actual tears. Tsuyu said, "Ribbit," in a way that somehow conveyed enormous amusement. Todoroki looked mildly confused about why everyone was reacting so strongly to something he apparently considered obvious. Momo's face went through every shade between pink and crimson in about 4 seconds. "You, in front of everyone everyone should witness beauty being honored," Izuku said without a trace of shame. Momo closed her eyes, took a breath, opened them. 7 o'clock, she said, "and you're paying." Izuku's smile could have powered the stadium for a week. "I conquered 7 dungeons for treasure, my lady. Tonight we spend it." Aizawa, who had witnessed the entire exchange from the front of the room, opened his mouth, closed it, looked at his lecture notes, looked at the clock, looked at the ceiling. "I'm going to pretend that didn't just happen during my class," he said to nobody in particular. Moving on. He couldn't move on. The class wouldn't let him. The next 15 minutes were chaos. The dinner happened. What passed between Izuku and Momo that evening stayed between them. But when they arrived at school the next morning, Momo was wearing something new. A small pin on her uniform collar, a 7-pointed star in gold. She wouldn't explain it when asked. She just touched it with her fingertips and smiled a private smile that said everything without saying a word. Izuku saw the pin from across the classroom. His eyes softened in a way Class 1A had never seen before. The boy who had conquered dungeons and destroyed monsters and faced down villains without blinking, that boy looked at Momo Yaoyorozu's collar pin, and his expression turned into something tender. Jiro noticed. She always noticed. "You two are going to make me diabetic," she said. Momo's composure shattered into a laugh. Hosu City burned on a Thursday night. The hero killer Stain, Akaguro Chizome, had been carving his way through the pro-hero community for weeks. His body count was climbing. His philosophy was spreading. His name was spoken in whispers by civilians and screamed in briefing rooms by hero agencies. He killed heroes he deemed unworthy. He left the worthy alive. His definition of worthy was his own and non-negotiable, and it usually boiled down to whether or not he thought you deserved the title based on criteria only he understood. Class 1A was in Hosu City for internships. Izuku had accepted an internship with a minor agency, primarily because their jurisdiction included the district where Stain had been cited. He had no interest in learning from a mentor. He had already had the greatest teacher imaginable, the memories of a king who built an empire from nothing. What he wanted was the hero killer, because Izuku recognized what Stain was. He'd seen men like Stain in Sinbad's memories, idealists who'd crossed the line into brutality, men who believed so completely in their cause that they'd forgotten the value of the lives they were destroying to serve it. They were dangerous. And they needed to be stopped by someone who wouldn't hesitate, wouldn't moralize, wouldn't turn the confrontation into a philosophical debate. The call came through Izuku's phone at 11:47 p.m. A location, an alley in the warehouse district. A pro hero down, the second one this week. Izuku moved through Hosu's burning streets with his metal vessels gleaming under the orange light of distant fires. The Nomu that Shigaraki had released as a distraction, lesser versions, mass-produced, rampaged through the main streets. Heroes were handling them. Poorly, but handling them. That wasn't Izuku's concern tonight. He found the alley. Ida Tenya was on the ground, paralyzed. Stain's quirk, Blood Curdle, had locked his body in place after the villain drew blood with a throwing knife. Ida lay face down on the concrete, his armor cracked, his engines cold, his eyes wide and furious and full of the same suicidal vengeance that had driven him here in the first place. His brother, Ingenium, had been Stain's most recent victim, crippled, career ended, and Ida had come to Hosu alone, without backup, without a plan, driven by nothing except the desire to make the man who hurt his brother bleed. He found Stain. Stain had found him back. And now Ida was paralyzed on the ground, watching the hero killer raise his katana for the finishing blow. Unworthy, Stain said. His voice was flat and certain. You came here for vengeance, boy. There is nothing heroic in revenge. The katana rose. A golden, ornate dagger crossed the alley at the speed of a bullet and knocked the blade off its arc. The katana flew from Stain's hand and embedded itself in the brick wall 3 feet away, vibrating with the impact. Stain turned. Izuku stepped from the shadows at the mouth of the alley. His adventurer garb was visible under the moonlight, the flowing coat, the gold catching every stray photon, the bracelets and the necklace and the ring. His arms were loose at his sides. His posture was unhurried. His face carried the same expression it always carried when he encountered something that needed to be resolved. A king does execute his subjects in the mud. Akaguro Chizome, Izuku said. His voice filled the alley like it was built for spaces exactly this size. You claim to be a purifier of heroes, but you are a butcher with a philosophy. Stain's eyes narrowed. He recognized the boy from the sports festival broadcast. Everyone in Japan had seen the sports festival broadcast. You, Stain said. His stance shifted. From executioner to combatant, he drew a second blade from his waist. The dungeon boy. I watched your fights. You have the eyes of someone real. I have the eyes of a king, Izuku corrected, and kings decide who lives and dies in their domain. You've been deciding without permission. Stain moved. He was fast. Blindingly, terrifyingly fast. Years of killing pro heroes had honed his body into a weapon that operated at speeds most fighters couldn't track. His second blade came in low and sweeping, a disemboweling strike aimed at Izuku's midsection. Izuku touched his necklace. Valifor. The transformation was ice and fur and multiple tails, his form shifting into the snow fox entity as Stain's blade arrived. Izuku flowed backward, his body lighter in this form, faster, more fluid, and Stain's blade cut air. The alley became their arena. Stain attacked with the speed and ferocity of a man who had killed dozens of heroes, each strike aimed at joints, at arteries, at the weak points of any human body. He was efficient. He was savage. He was the most dangerous non-powered combatant in Japan, and Izuku matched him blow for blow without breaking a sweat. Every strike was met, every angle was covered. 7 dungeons, 7 labyrinths filled with monsters that made Stain look like a child with a butter knife. Izuku's body had been forged in fire that burned hotter than anything the hero killer could produce. His reflexes were beyond human. His combat instincts were the instincts of a man who had fought gods. Stain pressed harder, faster. His breathing was elevating. His strikes were growing more desperate because every single one was being deflected or avoided with an ease that told him the truth he was beginning to understand. He was outclassed. Completely. Fundamentally. He landed a cut. Stain's blade caught Izuku's forearm, a shallow slice across the skin, drawing a thin line of red. Stain moved instantly, tongue extending, licking the blood from his blade in the same motion. Blood curdle activated. The quirk entered Izuku's bloodstream. It sought his nervous system. It attempted to lock his motor functions, to paralyze his body the way it had paralyzed Ida and 100 heroes before him. Izuku stood there. He smiled. The rook in his blood sang. The mogwai flowing through every cell of his body recognized the foreign invasion and purified it, burning blood curdle out of his system the way an ocean dissolves a drop of poison. The paralysis never reached his muscles. It never reached his brain. It arrived and it was unmade. Stain stared. His tongue was still extended. His eyes were wide. In all his years of killing, in every hero he had ever cut, his quirk had never failed. It was absolute. It was his certainty, his guarantee that any blade that drew blood was the end of the fight. It did nothing to Izuku Midoriya. My blood answers only to the flow of the world, Izuku said. He raised one hand toward Stain. And the world has decided you're finished. He spoke a single word, a command imbued with the power of Valifor, the djinn of falsehood and prestige, whose domain included the manipulation of perception and reality. Stagnation. The air around Stain thickened. It became something heavier than air, something with density and resistance that pressed against his body from every direction. His muscles still worked, his brain still fired, but his body moved as though trapped in amber. His sword arm took 10 seconds to travel an inch. His legs could not lift. His chest could barely expand to breathe. He was conscious, fully aware, trapped inside a body that refused to obey at any speed that mattered. Izuku walked forward at a normal pace. Each step echoed in the silent alley. He reached Stain, the hero killer locked in near stillness, his eyes burning with fury and something else, something that might have been respect, and removed the blade from his grip the way a man takes a book from a shelf. He examined the blade for a moment. Then he set it aside. His palm struck Stain in the solar plexus. One hit. Clean. The force of it lifted the hero killer off his feet and sent him backward into the alley wall, where he hit and slid down and stayed down, unconscious. The effect of stagnation released as Stain lost consciousness, his body going limp. The hero killer Stain. Defeated. One exchange, one technique, one palm strike. Izuku reverted to human form. He turned to Ida. The paralysis from blood curdle was still holding Ida's body in place. Izuku knelt beside him. Ida's eyes, the only things he could move, were fixed on Izuku with an intensity that mixed shame, gratitude, and confusion in equal parts. "Can you move yet?" Izuku asked, Ida's jaw unlocked. The paralysis was fading. My arms are. "Give it a minute." Izuku sat beside him on the ground. His back rested against the alley wall. The gold of his bracelets caught the moonlight. When Ida's body released, muscles unlocking in sequence from his core outward, he immediately tried to stand. His legs failed him. He fell forward and Izuku caught his shoulder. "Slow," Izuku said. "You're safe. It's over." Ida's face crumpled. The anger that had driven him to Hosu, the blind, consuming fury at what Stain had done to his brother, it was still there, but it was drowning under something else. Something heavier. "I came here to kill him," Ida whispered. "I came here to... I know. My brother is in a hospital bed, and I came here alone because I thought if I... Tenya." Izuku's voice dropped. The charm was gone. The playfulness was gone. What remained was weight. The weight of someone who had lived a lifetime before this one, who had seen what vengeance cost, who had watched men destroy themselves in pursuit of retribution that never filled the hole it was meant to fill. "A leader lives for his people," Izuku said. "Vengeance brings nothing home." Ida's shoulders shook. He pressed his forehead to the concrete and his fists clenched, and he breathed through something that was equal parts grief and release. "Your brother is alive," Izuku continued. "He needs you alive. Your classmates need you alive. The people who will one day rely on you as a pro hero need you alive. You don't honor Ingenium's legacy by dying in an alley. You honor it by becoming something worthy of the name." Ida lifted his head. His eyes were red. His face was a mess, but his breathing was steadying. "How do you do that?" Ida asked. "Do what?" "Say exactly what I need to hear." Izuku smiled. It was smaller than his usual grin. "Warmer." "I've had practice." He stood. He offered his hand. Ida took it. Izuku pulled him to his feet and draped Ida's arm over his shoulder to support his weight. Ida was taller, heavier in his armor, but Izuku held him without effort. "Let's go," Izuku said. "The heroes will want to process stain, and you need medical attention." They walked out of the alley together, Izuku supporting Ida's weight. The moonlight catching the gold on Izuku's wrists. The night air of Hosu still carrying the distant sounds of chaos. But in this moment, in this narrow street, there was silence and there was peace. Todoroki found them 3 blocks later. He'd been searching since he received Ida's location ping. Running through burning streets, ice forming and melting in rotation, his face tight with concern. He stopped when he saw them, Izuku, supporting Ida, walking at Ida's pace, both of them alive. "Is he?" Todoroki started. "He's fine," Izuku said. "Stain is unconscious in the alley behind us. You might want to call it in before he wakes up." Todoroki stared. Then he pulled out his phone and made the call. His eyes stayed on Izuku the entire time, the same look he'd worn since the sports festival. Recognition, understanding. Something approaching something he hadn't felt toward many people in his life. Trust. The police arrived. The pro-heroes arrived. Gran Torino arrived, wheezing and angry. The alley was cordoned off. Stain was secured, bound, muzzled, transported. The official report would credit the defeat to collective hero effort. The unofficial story, the one that spread through hero agencies like wildfire, the one whispered in briefing rooms and training facilities, was simpler. Midoriya Izuku. One technique, one hit. The hero killer never stood a chance. In the days that followed Hosu, the world shifted. It shifted in ways that weren't immediately visible to most people, but anyone paying attention could feel it. The same way you can feel the moment before an earthquake if you know what to listen for. Izuku Midoriya's name appeared in conversations that teenagers weren't supposed to be part of. Hero commission meetings, government security briefings, underground hero networks, the boy who couldn't be erased, couldn't be paralyzed, couldn't be overwhelmed, couldn't be stopped by anything the current framework of heroism understood. Principal Nezu invited Izuku to his office the week after Hosu. Tea was served. The conversation lasted 2 hours. What was discussed remained between them. But Nezu was seen smiling for the rest of the day with an expression that suggested he had found something rare, a student he didn't need to hold back. All Might sought Izuku out separately. The conversation happened on the roof of the UA main building during sunset, with the city spread below them and the sky turning colors. Young Midoriya, I need to tell you something that I've told very few people. Izuku leaned against the railing, the wind playing with his hair. You're dying. All Might's smile froze. Then it fell. His muscled form deflated, the thin, skeletal man emerging like a costume being removed. How long have you known? Toshinori asked. Since the sludge villain. The Rook shows me things, All Might. The birds of fate cluster around people who are approaching crossroads. You're covered in them. Izuku turned to face him fully. You're looking for a successor. Toshinori exhaled. I was. I've been searching for years. Someone to carry One for All forward. And now? The former symbol of peace looked at the 17-year-old king leaning against the railing with his golden bracelets catching the sunset, and he laughed. Tired, genuine, relieved. And now I think the world might be in better hands than I feared. I don't want One for All, Izuku said. He said it with respect, but with absolute finality. What I have is mine. What I am was built through my own trials, but I will carry the weight you're about to set down, All Might. That much I can promise. Toshinori's eyes were wet. He blinked it away. You know, when I was young, I asked my master what a true hero looked like. What did she say? She said a true hero is someone who makes other people feel safe just by being near. Toshinori smiled. I think she would have liked you very much. Izuku's expression softened. I wish I could have met her. They stood in silence for a while. The sunset faded, the city lights came on below them. 2 generations of power, one fading, one rising, sharing space on a rooftop while the future rearranged itself. Back in Class 1A, the dynamic had shifted permanently after Hosu. The students had always respected Izuku's power. What Hosu added was something deeper, an understanding that his power came attached to character. He hadn't gone to that alley for glory. He'd gone because Ida was in danger, and Izuku considered that unacceptable. Ida himself was changed. The vengeance that had consumed him in Hosu was still present, but it had been transmuted, forged into something productive by the words Izuku had spoken in that alley. He trained harder. He focused more. He stopped isolating himself. And when he addressed Izuku in class, it was with a straightened spine and a formality that carried genuine weight. Midoriya-san, I owe you a debt I intend to repay through becoming a hero worthy of the name. Then do it, Izuku said simply, and call me Izuku. Kings don't need formality from their friends. Ida's eyes went wide. Then he nodded, a sharp, decisive motion. Izuku-san, then. Momo watched that exchange from her desk. The warmth in her chest was becoming a permanent fixture. A constant low-burning fire that flared every time Izuku did something that reminded her why she had fallen for him. And she had fallen for him. She'd stopped pretending otherwise somewhere between the USJ and the sports festival. Somewhere between keep them safe and the wink from the podium. Somewhere between dinner and the gold star pin she wore every day. She was his. She knew it with the same certainty she knew the periodic table. Completely, fundamentally, without question. And he was hers. She knew that too. Knew it in the way he looked at her when he thought she was focused elsewhere. Knew it in the way his hand found the small of her back when they walked together. Knew it in the way he said her name, Momo, like it was the answer to a question he'd been asking for lifetimes. The world was still turning. Villains were still rising. The League was still plotting. All for One was still lurking in the shadows of everything. But on this particular evening, as the sun set over UA, and the gold of Izuku's bracelets caught the dying light, and Momo leaned her head against his shoulder in the common room while the rest of Class 1A pretended to give them privacy and failed spectacularly. On this evening, the king had his kingdom, his people, his queen, and he was only getting started. The night in Hosu lingered. It lingered in the news cycles. It lingered in the hero community. It lingered in the way Izuku Midoriya's name was spoken, with weight now, with reverence that bordered on fear, with the particular kind of respect that is only given to those who have proven themselves beyond all reasonable argument. A 17-year-old had defeated the hero killer with a single technique. A 17-year-old had rendered Stain's quirk meaningless through some mechanism nobody could explain. A 17-year-old walked through Hosu carrying an injured classmate over his shoulder, like the entire apocalyptic night had been an inconvenience rather than a crisis. The city of Hosu smoldered behind them as Izuku walked Ida toward the medical perimeter 3 blocks south, and the weight on his shoulder was nothing. The weight of a classmate who had almost died for the wrong reasons, the weight of armor that had failed against a man with a philosophy and a blade, the weight of a lesson being learned in real time by a boy who would carry it forward or be crushed by it. Izuku chose to believe Ida would carry it. He had seen enough of Ida's spine to know the material was sound even when the direction was wrong. The ambulances were parked in a row at the edge of the containment zone. Red and blue lights painting the buildings in alternating washes. Paramedics moved with the particular urgency of people who had been waiting too long for patients to arrive. Todoroki was already there, standing beside the lead vehicle with his phone still in his hand, ice melting off his right shoulder in slow rivulets that caught the emergency lights. Izuku lowered Ida onto a gurney. The paramedics descended. Vitals were checked, stabilization was confirmed, and Ida was loaded into the vehicle with an efficiency that suggested they had done this too many times tonight already. Todoroki moved closer. His heterochromatic eyes tracked Izuku's face, reading something there that most people would miss. "You're thinking about something else," Todoroki said. Izuku smiled at him. The half-smile, the one that said the conversation was welcome, but the answer was complex. "I am thinking about the fact that the people who sent these villains are still breathing." Todoroki said nothing to that. His jaw shifted. He understood the weight of those words because he had grown up in a house where breathing people caused more damage than dead ones ever could. The Hosu footage hit the internet before dawn. shaky phone recordings from civilians on perimeter streets, drone footage from news agencies that arrived after the fighting stopped, a single body camera clip from a police officer who had been stationed at the alley mouth, 17 seconds of audio that captured the sound of Izuku's palm strike and the sound of Stain hitting the wall, and then silence. The clip had 40 million views by noon. The official Hero Commission report attributed Stain's defeat to a coordinated effort between multiple hero interns and the responding pro-heroes. The report was 4 pages long and mentioned Izuku Midoriya exactly once, in a footnote, as a contributing presence. The report was also, by any honest standard, fiction. The underground hero community had a different version. It moved through private channels, encrypted messaging, word of mouth between agency heads, the particular information network that exists between people who actually do the work rather than file the paperwork about it. Their version was simpler. The first-year student from the sports festival walked into an alley where the hero killer was about to execute a classmate, neutralized a paralysis Quirk through some mechanism that made immunologists lose sleep, defeated the most dangerous blade combatant in Japan without sustaining a scratch, and ended the encounter with one open palm strike to the center of mass. Their version was also the truth. In a transport cell bound for Tartarus, Stain sat with his arms secured and his jaw muzzled. The restraints were maximum security, rated for Quirks 3 tiers above his. He was motionless. His eyes, visible above the metal covering his mouth, were fixed on the opposite wall with an intensity that made the guards check on him every 4 minutes instead of the standard 8. He had spoken once since capture. One sentence, delivered to the processing officer before the muzzle went on. The green-haired boy, find out what he is. The officer filed it in the incident report. Standard procedure. The report moved through channels. It landed on a desk inside a Hero Commission sub-office that handled intelligence compilation. It sat in an inbox for 6 hours before being opened, read, tagged, and forwarded to a distribution list that included 3 names that should never have been on the same email thread. One of those names belonged to a man in a life support chamber who had been alive longer than the concept of hero licenses. In a bar that existed on paper as a shuttered restaurant in a ward where gentrification had given up and gone home, Shigaraki Tomura watched the Hosu footage on a laptop that Kurogiri had set in front of him 20 minutes ago. His right hand was at his neck. The scratching was constant, a friction sound that Kurogiri had learned to ignore the way one learns to ignore a dripping faucet. Skin was raw. Skin was almost breaking. The video played again. The 17 seconds, the palm strike, the silence. Shigaraki's hand stopped moving. He looked at Kurogiri. That thing, Shigaraki said. His voice carried the particular flatness of someone processing information their brain wanted to reject. That thing took the Nomu apart at USJ. That thing froze an entire exam zone in one breath. That thing just put down the hero killer like he was swatting a fly. His hand went back to his neck. What am I supposed to do with that? Kurogiri's mist shifted, the equivalent of a considered pause. Sensei has been monitoring the situation. Sensei's been monitoring. Great. Monitoring. While that kid keeps... The laptop screen cracked under Shigaraki's grip. 4 fingers only. The 5th stayed raised by muscle memory that saved the hardware from complete disintegration. He stared at the fractured screen, still playing the video through the damage. The bar's speaker system activated. A single click, the sound of a communication channel opening, then a voice, measured, unhurried, with the texture of something ancient wrapped in modern technology. Tomura. Shigaraki went still. I have been watching the boy since before Hosu, All for One said through the speaker. Since the entrance exam footage surfaced, since the USJ where he dismantled our investment in under 3 seconds. I did not tell you because understanding required observation, and observation required time. And now, Shigaraki's voice was tight. And now I understand. A pause that lasted 4 seconds, which, from All for One, was the equivalent of a long breath. His power operates outside the Quirk framework entirely. It draws from a source I have encountered once before, in records so old they predate my own life. He is a singularity, a point around which fate restructures itself. Another pause. Interesting. Proceed with the forest operation as planned, but adjust the target priority. I want the boy brought to Kamino. The speaker clicked off. Shigaraki stared at the broken laptop. His scratching resumed. The morning after Hosu was a Wednesday. Class 1A gathered in their homeroom with the particular energy of students who had watched their classmates' name trend worldwide overnight and were still deciding how to feel about it. Aizawa stood at the front in his usual posture, exhausted, irritated, carrying a coffee that had gone cold before he'd taken his second sip. His arm was in a sling from the injuries sustained fighting the villain horde at USJ weeks ago. The injuries had healed enough for light duty. Aizawa's definition of light duty and his doctor's definition shared approximately zero overlap. Ida walked in 12 minutes after the bell. His gait was stiff but present. His face carried something new, a sobriety that sat in the lines around his mouth and in the way his eyes tracked the room before settling on his seat. He moved to the front of the classroom. He turned to face everyone. "I owe this class an apology," Ida said. His voice was clear, steady in the way of someone who had practiced these words, but meant every one of them. "My actions in Hosu were reckless, selfish, and fundamentally opposed to everything I claim to represent as a hero in training. I pursued personal vengeance at the expense of my own safety and the safety of those who came to help me." His bow was deep, a full 90 degrees that held for 3 seconds. "I am sorry, and I am grateful." The room held its breath for a beat. Kirishima broke it first. "Hey, Ida, you came back. That's what matters, man." "What Kirishima said," Kaminari added, leaning back in his chair with the ease of someone who had decided that forgiveness was the simplest available option. "You messed up, you lived, you learned. That's basically the whole curriculum here." Ida straightened from his bow. His eyes found Izuku, seated in his usual spot, legs extended, arms crossed loosely over his chest, watching the scene with the particular warmth of someone who had already forgiven and was now watching the rest of the world catch up. "Izuku-san," Ida said, "the debt I owe you is one I intend to repay through becoming a hero worthy of the name." "Then do it," Izuku said. The words were simple and carried the full weight of someone who had said them once before in an alley and meant them more now than he had then. "And the debt was paid the moment you stood up in front of this room and said what you just said. That took more spine than most men have in a lifetime." Ida's throat moved. He nodded once. Sharp, decisive, and walked to his seat. Aizawa watched the exchange over the rim of his cold coffee. His expression was the flat line it always was, but something in his posture had eased half an inch. He set the coffee down. "If the emotional processing is complete," he said, "we have a curriculum to follow. Open your textbooks to page 47. The week after Hosu moved in the particular rhythm of institutional recovery, paperwork, debriefings, medical follow-ups, and the slow return to a schedule that pretended extraordinary things had not just happened. Class 1A trained. They studied. They existed in the strange normalcy of students whose lives kept intersecting with history and who were learning by degrees to treat that intersection as standard operating procedure. Izuku sat beside Momo in homeroom on Friday morning and placed a small box on her desk without looking at her. His textbook was already open. His pen was already moving. Momo looked at the box. She looked at Izuku. He was reading with the perfect composure of someone who had just done something significant and chosen to pretend it was mundane. She opened the box, a bracelet, gold. Thin and elegant, a single band with a clasp shaped like a crescent moon. Nothing to do with Djinn or power or anything supernatural, just beautiful craftsmanship meant for a beautiful woman. Her fingers touched it, lifted it. The weight was real, genuine gold, warm to the touch. She put it on. Her wrist turned once, admiring the way it caught the morning light through the classroom windows. Then she opened her textbook to the same page as everyone else and stared at it with an intensity that had nothing to do with the subject matter and everything to do with the heat rising from her collar to her ears. Jiro, one row back, leaned sideways and caught a glimpse of the bracelet. Her earphone jacks twitched, the involuntary movement they made when she was processing something that amused her. She said nothing. She filed it. She would use it later at a moment of maximum impact. In the second row, a Shido Mina was vibrating. She had seen the box. She had seen the bracelet go on. She had seen the color change in Momo's face. Her hands were flat on her desk, and her fingers were tapping in a rhythm that conveyed barely contained information that wanted desperately to become noise. Sero put a hand on her shoulder without looking away from his textbook. Containment protocols. Aizawa, at the front of the room, observed all of this with the energy of a man watching a slow-motion natural disaster that he had long since accepted was beyond his pay grade to prevent. The following week, Principal Nezu invited Izuku to his office. The invitation came through official channels. A formal note delivered to Izuku's desk during lunch period, bearing the principal's seal and phrased with the particular courtesy that Nezu extended to people he considered worth speaking to at length. The appointment was for 4 p.m. Tea would be served. Izuku arrived at 3:58. He knocked once. The door opened. Nezu himself, standing at his full diminutive height in his usual vest and tie, his small eyes bright with the intelligence that made him the most dangerous person in this building on any day where Izuku happened to be off campus. Midoriya-kun, please, sit. The office was warm. Bookshelves lined every wall. A pot of tea sat on the desk between 2 cups. Already poured, already at drinking temperature, Nezu had timed it to Izuku's arrival. Of course he had. Izuku sat. He took the offered cup. The tea was excellent, a blend he recognized from Sinbad's memories as something adjacent to what high-altitude merchants sold in ports that existed in a world layered alongside this one. You have questions, Izuku said. Nezu smiled. He picked up his own cup with both paws. I have observations that would benefit from your commentary. The questions will follow naturally. He sipped. Set the cup down. You resolved the USJ incursion in its entirety. You dominated the sports festival in a manner that made the existing ranking metrics irrelevant. You neutralized the hero killer in Hosu through means that our medical and quirk analysis teams cannot explain. His head tilted. The reports from every institution I consult describe you using different language. Some say unprecedented quirk. Some say mutation. The Intelligence Division filed a report last week that used the phrase potential existential concern. I find all of these descriptions inadequate. They are, Izuku agreed. Then tell me what the adequate description is. Izuku set his tea down. He looked at Nezu across the desk, one intelligence meeting another, one small creature whose mind reshaped everything it touched, recognizing its counterpart in a boy whose soul had done something similar across lifetimes. I am the reincarnation of a king who lived in an age before quirks existed, Izuku said. My power comes from Djinn, entities of immense magical authority sealed inside metal vessels by the will of the world itself. I access that power by conquering 7 dungeons. The structures your government classified as inaccessible and built walls around. My abilities operate on Magoi, the life energy that flows through all living things and is channeled through the Rook, the white birds of fate that exist at the boundary between this world and the next. He picked his tea back up. I am a singularity, a point in the flow of fate around which history restructures itself. This is what your Intelligence Division is trying to describe when they use phrases like existential concern. They are correct that I am without precedent in this era. They are incorrect that I am a concern. Nezu was silent for 8 seconds. His tea remained in his paws, untouched. You are remarkably forthcoming, Nezu said. You are remarkably worth being forthcoming with, Izuku replied. And I have learned across lives that secrecy serves ambition. Transparency serves alliance. I would rather have your alliance. Nezu's smile widened. He sipped his tea, set it down. His small paws folded on the desk. The League of Villains is going to escalate, Nezu said. What happened at USJ was a test. What happened in Hosu was a side effect of their broader operations. The entity behind Shigaraki Tomura, the one who provided the Nomu, the warp gates, the resources, is still active. Still planning. All for one, Izuku said. Nezu blinked. One of the very few times in his professional career that something had surprised him visibly. The Rook shows me things, Izuku explained. The birds of fate cluster around certain names, certain locations. They have been clustering around one particular signature since before I enrolled. Something old. Something that has been stealing power from others for a very long time. He met Nezu's eyes. I know what he is. I know where the confrontation is heading, and I know that when it arrives, I will be the one who ends it. Nezu studied him for a long moment, Then he picked up his teapot and refilled both their cups with the composure of a creature who had just been told the future and found it, for the first time in a long while, acceptable. I believe, Midoriya-kun, that the world has been waiting for someone like you for a very long time. Izuku's smile carried the weight of 2 lives and the lightness of someone who had always known this was true. It did not have to wait long, sir. Nezu laughed, genuine, bright, the sound of someone who had found something rare and intended to enjoy it thoroughly. They spoke for 2 more hours. The tea was refilled 3 times. Summer arrived with the training camp. The bus ride took 4 hours through mountain roads that wound between forest walls so thick the sunlight came through in broken columns. Class 1A filled the vehicle with the particular noise of 20 teenagers heading toward a week of physical punishment and pretending to be excited about it. Kirishima and Kaminari argued about arm wrestling records. Ashido braided Tsuyu's hair. Siro tested the structural limits of his tape against the bus ceiling until Aizawa's glare achieved its intended effect. Izuku sat in the back row with his arm resting across the top of the seat. Momo was beside him, her head turned toward the window, a book open in her lap that she had stopped reading 20 minutes ago because the mountain scenery was winning. The gold bracelet caught the shifting forest light whenever the bus moved through a break in the canopy. "You're going to enjoy this week," Izuku said. Momo turned from the window. "What makes you certain?" "Because you perform best when you're pushed, and this camp is designed to push. I've seen what you become under pressure, Momo. It's extraordinary." Her cheeks colored, still, after months of this, still. And she turned back to the window with a press of her lips that was fighting a smile and losing. "You say things like that in the middle of a bus full of people who are absolutely listening. I say things like that because they are true and because you deserve to hear true things." His voice was low enough that only she caught it. "The audience is incidental." From 3 rows ahead, Jiru's earphone jack twitched. She had heard every word. Her expression was the specific one of someone collecting ammunition for a conversation that Momo did not yet know was coming. The wild, wild pussycats greeted them at the facility perimeter. Mandalay, professional, composed, her stance communicating authority. Tiger, a mountain of muscle and silence standing at the tree line. Pixie Bob, whose eyes found Izuku the moment he stepped off the bus and stayed on him with the particular attention of a woman who reads hero magazines and remembers faces from them. And Ragdoll, bouncing, energetic, her search quirk already active and sweeping every student with the invisible evaluation that told her everything about their abilities in a single pass. Ragdoll stopped bouncing when she hit Izuku. Her smile froze. Her eyes went wide. Her head tilted to one side and then the other, the way a bird moves when it encounters something its instincts cannot categorize. "What?" she said and then stopped. Her mouth worked for a moment. "What am I reading? Those numbers aren't." She looked at Mandalay with an expression that communicated alarm and wonder in equal proportion. "His output values are showing as overflow errors." Mandalay's professional composure held. Barely. Her eyes moved to Izuku, standing at the front of the student group with his hands in his pockets and his bracelets catching the mountain sun, looking at the forest facility with the mild appreciation of someone evaluating a pleasant vacation destination. "Midoriya, Izuku," Mandalay said. "We've been briefed." "All good things, I hope," Izuku said pleasantly. "The brief was 6 pages," Mandalay replied. It had a supplementary incident appendix. Thorough. Pixie Bob moved forward. She was doing the thing where she stood slightly too close, and her posture communicated things that had nothing to do with professional mentorship. "You're the one from the sports festival. The lightning one. The one who—" "Guilty of all charges," Izuku confirmed. His smile was warm, genuine, and carried the particular radiance that made women in this story lose their conversational footing. "And you must be Pixie Bob. I've read about your earth flow technique. The terrain manipulation is remarkable. You reshape the battlefield the way an artist reshapes clay." Pixie Bob's cheeks went pink. Her mouth opened, closed. Opened again. Tiger cleared his throat from the tree line. It was the kind of throat clearing that communicated. "We have a schedule." The training began. For 5 days, Class 1A was broken down and rebuilt. The exercises were punishing. designed to push quirks past their comfort zones and into the territory where growth lives. Bakugo detonated against reinforced targets until his palms bled, and then continued until his palms hardened. Todoroki cycled between ice construction and fire endurance until both sides operated without the hesitation that had previously marked his transitions. Kirishima took hits that would hospitalize civilians and stayed standing, because his definition of unbreakable had expanded every single day he'd spent watching Izuku exist in the same class as him. Izuku trained alongside them because he found value in community, in the shared experience of effort, in the way strength built collectively became stronger than strength built in isolation. His own exercises were different. While the students pushed their quirks to failure and back, Izuku worked on Magoi channeling. The flow of energy between his vessels, the speed of his equip transformations, the efficiency of maintaining multiple Djinn resonances simultaneously. He sat cross-legged at the edge of the training field with his eyes closed and the rook swirling around him in patterns that nobody else could see, and the students who passed by felt the air pressure shift and the temperature fluctuate, and understood they were walking near something that operated on a different scale than their exercises. Momo trained with focus that bordered on ferocity. Her creation quirk demanded understanding. Molecular composition, material science, structural engineering, and she pushed it toward objects of increasing complexity. Shields became multi-layered composites. Simple weapons became precision instruments. She was building her arsenal the way a general builds a defense network. Comprehensive, adaptable, ready for variables she could anticipate and variables she could only prepare for. On the fifth night, Izuku found her at the edge of the training field after dinner. She was sitting on a boulder with her notebook open, sketching molecular diagrams by flashlight with the intensity of someone who had forgotten that sleep existed. He sat beside her without announcing himself. She didn't startle. She had felt him coming, the way she always felt him coming now. Some awareness that had built itself into her perception over months until his proximity was as readable as weather. "You're pushing harder than you need to," Izuku said. "I am pushing as hard as the situation demands," Momo replied. Her pen moved. A hexagonal lattice structure took shape on the page. "I watched you fight at USJ. I watched you fight at the sports festival. I watched Hosu on the news like everyone else." She set the pen down, turned to face him. Her expression was the one she wore when she had decided to say something she'd been organizing for a while. "I am going to be standing beside you when the next fight comes. I refuse to be standing there without being useful." Izuku looked at her, at the diagrams, at the bracelet on her wrist and the star pin that glinted at her collar even in the failing light. "You have never been anything less than useful," he said, "but I understand the desire, and I respect it." He reached over and tapped the notebook page, the hexagonal lattice. "This structure, if you compound it with a titanium boron layer beneath, the tensile strength increases by a factor of 3. Momo stared at the page, then at him. "How do you know advanced materials science?" 7 dungeons. Each one contained knowledge alongside danger. The third dungeon was built entirely around engineering puzzles, structural physics at a scale that would embarrass your university professors. He smiled. "I will teach you everything I know, Momo. Every formula, every structural principle, every material interaction I learned in those labyrinths. Your quirk has a ceiling that you have set for yourself based on available education. I intend to remove that ceiling." Her eyes went bright, the particular brightness of a brilliant mind, being offered access to knowledge it didn't know existed. Her lips parted and then pressed together, and the color rose in her face because the combination of his intelligence and his proximity and the warmth in his voice when he spoke about her potential was doing what it always did. "You are," she started. "Extraordinary, generous, devastatingly handsome in moonlight?" "Incorrigible," she said, but she was smiling. "You are absolutely incorrigible." And yet, she agreed, and her shoulder leaned against his, and they sat together on that boulder while the mountain night settled around them and the rook drifted overhead in patterns that meant contentment. The 6th night ended everything peaceful about that camp. Izuku's eyes opened at 11:43 p.m. He was on his feet before his conscious mind registered why. The rook had screamed, the white birds at the edge of his vision scattering in the pattern he had learned to read as imminent, massive, hostile. He was out of the cabin in 3 seconds. His bare feet hit the ground and the forest was wrong. The air tasted different. The insect noise had stopped, and from the eastern tree line came a heat signature that turned the canopy orange. Blue flames. They erupted across the treetops in a wave, consuming, spreading, turning the peaceful mountain facility into an inferno in seconds. The light they produced was the particular blue-white of Quirk-generated fire, burning at temperatures that wood alone could never produce. Then the tree line at the southern perimeter exploded inward, and something massive came through. Muscular. 8 feet of augmented flesh wrapped in fiber that multiplied his strength beyond measurement. He hit the camp perimeter at full speed, aimed at the student cabins, aimed at the easiest targets he could find. Izuku was between Muscular and the cabins before the villain's second step landed. Djinn of Wrath and Heroes, dwell in my body. Bale, the blue scales erupted across his skin. The lightning lived on every surface. His hair went electric, and the mountain air cracked with ozone as the static buildup spread outward in concentric rings. Muscular saw him and grinned. The grin of something that enjoyed pain, that fed on confrontation, that had come here specifically hoping to find the strongest thing available and break it. There you are, Muscular said. I was hoping. Izuku closed the distance. His fist hit Muscular's center mass, and the augmented fiber bunched to absorb it. Layers compressing, the quirk working as intended, absorbing kinetic energy and redistributing it through the muscle system. Against any other striker in this camp, the technique would hold. Against any pro hero with a strength-type quirk, it would hold. Izuku's fist carried Barrock-infused current. The lightning entered Muscular's fiber network at the point of impact and traveled. Muscle fibers are conductive. They carry electrical signals as their fundamental operating principle. And the augmentation quirk multiplied fiber density, which meant it also multiplied the available conductive pathways. More muscle meant more routes for the current to travel. More routes meant more comprehensive destruction. The lightning hit every fiber simultaneously. Muscular's body seized. Every augmented muscle fired at once, overloaded, burning, the fibers contracting with force that cracked his own bones from the inside. His grin vanished. His eyes rolled. His body locked in a full system spasm that lasted 2 seconds and then released as every augmented fiber blew its conductive capacity and went inert. He hit the ground. The impact shook the clearing. He lay still, chest rising in shallow breaths, his quirk dead inside his body, his consciousness somewhere far below the surface of function, 3 seconds from first contact to completion. Izuku looked at the fallen villain the way a man looks at something he has already moved past thinking about. The camp alarms were sounding now. Students were emerging from cabins. The pussycats were mobilizing. And from the eastern perimeter, beyond the blue fire that was still spreading, more presences were approaching. Izuku could feel them in the rook, could read their intent in the way the white birds scattered and reformed. Dabi came over the tree line at altitude, propelled by explosions of blue flame that functioned as thrust. He was silhouetted against his own fire, a figure in a coat with patchwork skin and a presence that radiated the particular hostility of someone who had come here with a mission and intended to complete it regardless of what he found. He found Izuku, hovering in Bale Equip, lightning wreathing his scaled form, positioned between the incoming threat and the 20 students behind him whose lives constituted the only variable Izuku cared about in this equation. Dabi hung in the air 30 meters away, and his blue flames flickered in the static field that Izuku's form generated. Disturbed by the electromagnetic interference, Dabi's expression shifted. He had seen the USJ footage. He had watched the sports festival broadcast. He had been briefed on what this particular student could do. Seeing it in person was a different thing entirely. "The Lightning Kid," Dabi said. His voice carried flat across the distance. "They told me you'd be here. Didn't mention you'd be this annoying about it." "Your fire is beautiful," Izuku said, and his voice was conversational, despite the combat stance, despite the scales and the lightning and the storm building above the camp at his unconscious command. "A shame you waste it on destruction rather than creation." Dabi's mouth twisted. Save the philosophy. He extended both arms. Blue fire erupted from his palms in twin streams that merged into a single concentrated lance aimed at Izuku's chest. Bararok. The divine lightning descended from the storm Izuku's presence had built. It hit Dabi's fire lance at the midpoint between them, and the two energies collided with a sound that echoed off the mountain walls. A crack like the atmosphere splitting. The lightning superheated the air faster than Dabi's flames could expand into it, and the resulting pressure differential dispersed the fire outward in a ring that scorched the treetops but hit nothing living. Dabi fired again, and again. Each time the lightning answered, meeting fire at the midpoint, dispersing it, returning the energy differential in the form of static discharge that made Dabi's patchwork skin crackle and smoke at the staple points. The third exchange taught Dabi what the second had suggested and the first had implied. He could do this forever, and the result would be the same every single time. He was outmatched in a way that escalation would only make worse. He took a bolt. The fourth exchange, Izuku let the Bararok continue past the midpoint. The lightning hit Dabi across the torso, and the impact sent him backward through the air. Arms spread, fire guttering, his trajectory describing an arc that ended in the tree line 300 meters west. He hit. He did not immediately re-emerge. Izuku turned his attention downward. Below him, in the camp clearing, the fight was still happening at ground level. Compress, a man in a mask and a top hat with a quirk that compacted targets into marble-sized objects, was moving through the chaos toward a specific blonde figure. Bakugo. Izuku dove. Full speed. Djinn Equip gave him lightning step movement, short-range teleportation along electrical pathways that functioned as faster-than-eye relocation. He appeared at ground level between Compress and Bakugo. In the time it took Compress to extend his hand, Compress's fingertips brushed the air where Bakugo's shoulder had been 0.3 of a second prior. Izuku's hand was around the villain's wrist, a grip that carried the full enhanced strength of Baal's physical augmentation. The sound of bones compressing under that grip was immediate and sharp. Compress screamed. His mask cracked from the involuntary tension in his jaw. The marble he'd been generating in his other hand, already primed for Bakugo's compression, fell from his weakened fingers and rolled across the dirt. Izuku squeezed once more and felt the joint give. Compress dropped to his knees, his functioning hand clutching the destroyed wrist, his screaming becoming something breathless and constant. Bakugo stood 3 feet behind Izuku. His palms were already crackling, explosions ready, fury present as always. But his eyes were fixed on the back of Izuku's head with something that was not fury. Something closer to the expression of a person watching an event that confirms a suspicion they had been denying for months. "You good?" Izuku said over his shoulder. The words were casual. The combat was already over. Bakugo's jaw worked. 3 seconds of silence that cost him something to maintain. "I didn't need saving," Bakugo said. The words were automatic. Reflex. "I know," Izuku said, and then he was gone, launching upward, back into the sky because the perimeter still held hostiles, and the night was young. The remaining League members read the situation with the speed of people whose survival instincts were more developed than their loyalty. Spinner took stock of Muscular's fallen form, of Dabi's absence from the sky, of Compress's shattered wrist, and made the only intelligent decision available. He ran. Twice, and Magni followed. The warp gate that opened at the edge of the tree line swallowed them. Kurogiri's missed, pulling the survivors out before the losses became total. The forest burned for another 40 minutes before the Pussycats' territory manipulation and Todoroki's ice suppression brought it under control. The camp was damaged, 2 cabins destroyed, a section of training fields scorched beyond repair, the eastern tree line reduced to charcoal. The students stood in the clearing, some in pajamas, some in hastily grabbed hero costumes, all of them staring at the aftermath with the particular expression of people who had just experienced their second major villain assault and were beginning to understand that this was the pattern now. Mandalay approached Izuku as he reverted to human form. The scales receded, the lightning faded. He landed on bare feet in the clearing and looked at her with the same unhurried composure he always wore. "You saved everyone," Mandalay said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were doing the thing that happened when professionalism was fighting wonder and losing. This was the only acceptable outcome, Izuku said. Mandalay had nothing to add to that. She nodded. She turned to assess her team's injuries. Tiger was holding a compress to a burn on his forearm. Ragdoll was shaken but functional. The students were intact, scared, some of them, adrenaline sick and wide-eyed but whole. Pixie Bob materialized at Izuku's shoulder with the timing of someone who had been waiting for the professional conversation to end. Her cat ears were singed. Her costume was smudged with ash. She was still, objectively, extremely attractive, and she was making zero effort to pretend she was approaching him for professional reasons. So, she said, her voice pitched lower than her usual frequency. I'm 22, I have my own property, and you just saved my entire life. Izuku turned to her. The smile he gave her was brilliant, full of warmth, full of appreciation, carrying the particular quality that made women across this story forget how their mouths worked. Pixie Bob-san, I am honored beyond expression, but my heart has already been claimed by someone far more stubborn than a building. Her eyes narrowed. Understanding arrived. The Yaoyorozu girl. The Yaoyorozu woman, Izuku corrected. The emphasis was gentle but absolute. It carried the same finality as a closed gate. Beautiful to look at, impossible to pass through. Pixie Bob sighed. The sigh was long and carried the weight of missed opportunities. She's lucky. We both are, Izuku said, and the warmth in his voice when he said it was the warmth of someone who meant every syllable. Behind him, 20 feet back, in the cluster of students being checked over by Ragdoll, Momo had heard all of it. Every word. Her hands were pressed flat against her thighs, and her face was the particular shade of red that appears when you are simultaneously mortified by the public nature of a declaration and profoundly moved by its content. Jiro stood beside her with both earphone jacks extended and a grin that could only be described as merciless. The Yaoyorozu woman, Jiro repeated. He said woman, with emphasis. I heard, Momo managed. Your entire face is a different color right now. I am aware. Are you going to faint? Because if you're going to faint, I want to get my phone out first. Momo closed her eyes, took a breath, opened them. She looked across the clearing at Izuku, at his bare feet and his wild hair and the gold on his wrists and the absolute certainty in his posture, and her expression softened into something that the students around her had never quite seen before. Something unguarded. Something that said she was done managing her reactions to this particular person and had decided to simply feel them. Jiro's grin dimmed into something warmer. She bumped Momo's shoulder with her own. You've got it bad. I know, Momo said. She was smiling. I know. The intelligence from the forest camp moved through channels faster than Izuku expected. The Rook had shown him direction, a sense of where the League's leadership was operating from, a pull that corresponded to a ward in a city he could name. But the operational details required cooperation. Izuku gave his information to Aizawa, who gave it to Nezu, who gave it to the people whose job it was to turn information into coordinated action. Camino Ward. An industrial district in a city whose name nobody remembered until it became the site of the most significant confrontation in Japanese hero history. The operation was planned in a week. Izuku was briefed because Nezu insisted on it, over the objections of 3 Hero Commission officials who believed a student should not be part of an operational planning session. Nezu's response to those objections was a single raised eyebrow and the observation that the student in question had personally resolved more S-class villain encounters in the past 3 months than their entire agency roster combined. The objections withdrew. The strike team assembled, Best Jeanist, Edshot, Gran Torino, Kamui Woods, Matesh, Lady, and a dozen support heroes providing perimeter and evacuation functions. Their target was the League's operating base, confirmed through multiple intelligence streams, corroborated by the direction the Rook had given Izuku weeks prior. The operation launched on a Thursday evening. Izuku did not arrive with the strike team. He arrived from the opposite direction, at the opposite end of the district, walking through streets that were empty, because the Rook had shown him where the civilians ended and the war zone began. His boots clicked against pavement that was still warm from the day's sun. His bracelets caught the fading light. His coat moved behind him in a wind that seemed to follow rather than push. The strike team hit the League's base at 7:04 p.m. Coordinated entry. Multiple breach points. Professional execution of a professional operation. Best Djinnists' fibers swept the lower floors. Edgeshot's thinning body pierced defensive positions. Gran Torino's speed cleared corridors. They found Shigaraki. They found Kurogiri. They found the remnants of an organization that had lost its teeth at the forest camp and was holding territory through stubbornness rather than strength. And then the building came apart. The reinforced structure at the center of the district, the one the intelligence reports had flagged as a secondary location, a support facility, a medical annex, erupted from the inside. Concrete and steel and support beams flew outward in a sphere of destruction that announced its cause before anyone could see it. All for One rose from the rubble. He was massive in presence, if not in stature. Life support technology wrapped around a body that had lived longer than nations, arms that held stolen power in layers so deep that the air around them warped. His face was a ruin of medical intervention and damage that predated the current generation of heroes. His voice, when it came, was the voice of something that had never needed to raise its volume because everything it had ever spoken to had always been listening. Good evening. All for One said, air cannon. The shockwave hit the strike team at the speed of compressed atmosphere. Best Djinnist, ranked 4th in Japan, career spanning decades, power that could restrain villains without visible effort, was thrown from his feet like a leaf in a hurricane. His fibers, already deployed, snapped under the pressure differential. Edgeshot deflected partially, but still went sideways. Gran Torino was mid-approach, and the shockwave caught him at maximum velocity, reversing his momentum and sending him through a building wall. Mountain Lady expanded to full height at the perimeter. 60 feet of hero, feet planted, arms braced. The sight of her, immense, powerful, positioned between the villain and the evacuation routes, was supposed to be reassuring. All for One gestured in her direction without looking. Impact reversion combined with kinetic boost. The air between them compressed and released, and Mountain Lady, 60 feet and thousands of tons, slid backwards 6 meters, her feet carving furrows in the asphalt, her arms shaking from absorbing a force that had no business being generated by a single hand. The gap between All for One and the heroes was visible. Immediate. The kind of gap that made tactical planning irrelevant because the premise of the planning, that the target was within an achievable threat level, was wrong. Izuku walked onto the field. He came from the far end of the district. His pace was unchanged. His expression was unchanged. The wind at his back carried the particular charge that preceded weather events, and above him the sky was already shifting. Clouds pulling together from clear air, the atmosphere reorganizing itself around the power that was building in the 7 metal objects distributed across his body. All for One turned to face him. The moment of that turn, the moment when the oldest villain in Japan redirected his attention from the pro-heroes he had just dismissed and focused entirely on the 17-year-old walking toward him, changed the atmosphere of the entire district. Something shifted. Something that everyone present felt in their chest, in the way their breathing became harder, in the way the air itself seemed to take a side. Izuku stopped 20 feet away. The space between them was full of dust and rubble and the orange glow of distant fires. The pro-heroes at the field's edges were pulling themselves together, recalibrating, trying to understand what they were now witnessing. "You gathered everyone here to meet me," Izuku said. His voice carried across the district without effort. "I appreciate the dedication, but I would have come regardless." All for One's head tilted. The life support structure made the motion look insectile. "You are something this era has failed to produce before," he said. "A soul that predates the entire architecture of power as this world understands it. A force that operates on channels I cannot steal." His voice was conversational, interested. The voice of a collector encountering a piece that defies categorization. "I did not bring you here to fight. I brought you here to offer you a place in what comes next." Izuku looked at him the way he had looked at every villain he had ever faced, with the composure of someone who had already decided the outcome and was extending the conversation as a courtesy. "You have a century of theft on your hands," Izuku said. "You built your power by taking it from others. Every quirk in that arm belonged to someone who wanted to keep it." He raised his chin. The bracelets on his wrists began to glow, warm gold light that pushed back the district's shadows. You look at me and see an asset. I look at you and see a correction that is overdue by 100 years. All for One processed this for approximately 2 seconds, then he moved. Air cannon fired at point blank. The compressed atmosphere wave crossed the 20 feet between them at the speed of sound. A wall of force that had just thrown pro-heroes through buildings directed at a single target with the full intent of ending the conversation through superior physics. Izuku touched his golden bracelet. Bail. The transformation was simultaneous with the air cannon's arrival. Blue scales erupted across his skin as the force wave hit, and the magi barrier that accompanied every Djinn Equip absorbed the shockwave's kinetic energy, converted it to static charge, and added it to the building storm above. All for One's best opening strike became additional ammunition for his opponent. The lightning answered. Bararok hit All for One from the clouds above, a blue-white bolt that descended at the speed of natural lightning and struck the villain's raised defensive arm with force that cratered the ground beneath his feet. All for One's shock absorption quirk engaged, pulling the electrical energy into his body and neutralizing it. But Izuku was already switching. Focalor. The scales vanished. Feathers erupted. His body left the ground as the wind answered his new form. Lifting him, accelerating him, the air pressure in the district dropping as Focalor's domain asserted itself over the atmosphere. For as Zora launched from his raised palms, twin spiraling winds of microscopic cutting edges that converged on All for One's position from opposing angles. The villain responded with spring-like limbs combined with kinetic boost, his arm elongating and striking the nearest tornado with force that disrupted its rotation temporarily. The second tornado hit his flank and tore through 2 layers of his coat before a rivet stab from his free arm created a physical barrier of bone-like protrusions that scattered the wind pattern. Izuku switched again. The speed of his equipped transitions was faster than All for One's ability to adapt, each form lasting only long enough to deploy a single technique before shifting into the next, creating a combat pattern that had no predictable rhythm. Valifor. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in a heartbeat. Garufor Zairu, the breath of absolute cold, launched as a wave that froze the moisture in the air itself, creating a corridor of crystallized atmosphere aimed at All for One's exposed life support equipment. The villain's infrared ray melted the ice corridor before it arrived. He combined it with airwalk to lift himself from the ground, removing the terrain advantage. His adaptation was impressive. The response time of a mind that had been fighting for 100 years, that had encountered every variety of power imaginable and developed answers for each, but he had never encountered all of them at once. Izuku went through 4 equips in 8 seconds. Each one deployed a technique. Each technique came from a different direction, a different element, a different vector of attack. Lightning from above, wind from the sides, cold from below, sound from Zepar. A resonance burst that disrupted All for One's equilibrium for 0.3 of a second, which was enough time for the next technique to arrive unblocked. The district crumbled around them. City blocks became debris. The storm above was full spectrum now. Lightning and wind and cold air mass collision and the pressure differentials that turned normal weather into apocalypse. The pro-heroes at the edges of the field had retreated to the perimeter, pulled back by the simple physical reality that remaining close would kill them through collateral alone. Mount Lady watched from the evacuation line. 60 feet tall, and she felt small. She had seen power before. She lived in a world of power. But what was happening at the center of Camino Ward was something else, something that belonged to an older era, an era of gods and kings playing out in the middle of an industrial district while buildings fell and the sky raged. All for One escalated. He pulled quirks from the League members still in range, reclaiming what he had distributed, compounding stolen abilities into combination attacks that grew in power with each absorption. He hit Izuku with a combined kinetic air impact strike that displaced the air in a 30-meter radius and turned the rubble into projectiles. Izuku took the hit. His Magoi barrier absorbed it. He converted the energy he was using All for One's own output as fuel. Every force applied to him fed back into the Rook stream that powered his techniques. The harder All for One hit him, the more energy became available for the response. It was a losing equation for the villain, and the villain was beginning to understand this. Izuku could see it in the way All for One's attacks were shifting from offensive to exploratory, testing for gaps that did not exist. "You have never fought something you could not steal from," Izuku said. He was hovering in Focolor Equip, feathers spread, the wind around him visible as distortion. "That is the core of your philosophy. If it exists, you can take it. If you can take it, it becomes yours. You have lived 100 years on that single truth." He raised both hands. The clouds above compressed, the storm concentrated. The atmospheric energy being held in that sky was visible as raw light, blue and white and carrying weight that made the air thick below it. "My power was given to me by the world itself," Izuku said. "It lives in the flow of fate. It answers to the Rook. You cannot take it because it is not the kind of thing that can be held by hands like yours. It was never going to be." All for One's posture changed. For the first time in the confrontation, for the first time, perhaps, in decades, something in his body language communicated a response that was not strategy or adaptation. It was recognition. The recognition of a predator that has finally encountered something above it on the food chain. Bararak Inkaradsai. The full version. The version that the dungeon housing Bale had used as its final gate trial. The version that drew from every available atmospheric ion in a radius that spanned the entire district. Lightning, the divine kind, the kind that existed in myths about the ends of eras, coalesced above Kamino Ward in a blade of absolute light. It was enormous. It was the single most concentrated expression of destructive force that any living person on that field had ever witnessed. It was the answer to 100 years of stolen power, delivered in a language that predated Quirk's by millennia. The blade descended. All for One raised every defensive quirk he possessed simultaneously. Shock absorption, kinetic barrier, impact reversion, air wall. Layers of stolen protection stacked against a force that was never going to acknowledge their existence. The blade hit. The sound was beyond hearing. It was felt. In the chest, in the bones, in the ground itself. It traveled through the district as a physical wave that knocked everyone in a 2-block radius off their feet, regardless of their size or stability. The light was absolute, white, blue, and searing, the kind that left after images for minutes. When vision returned, and it took time, the center of Kamino Ward was gone, replaced by a crater that went down 30 feet and out 100 in every direction. At the center of that crater was a scorch mark in the shape of a man who had stood against the sky and lost. Nothing else remained of All for One. Izuku descended, his feathers folded, his form reverted. He landed at the crater's edge on human feet, and his hair was wild from the static, and his coat was singed at the edges, and his bracelets were still warm against his skin. He looked at the place where the most dangerous intelligence in Japan had been standing. "Correction applied," he said. The district was silent. The storm was breaking apart above. The clouds dispersing now that the power drawing them together had been released. An evening sky returned in patches, purple and orange, unreasonably beautiful given what had just happened beneath it. Mount Lady sat down. She had been at the perimeter. She was now sitting in the street with her legs folded like a child, her enormous form utterly still, her face blank with the specific expression of someone processing an event their brain had not been built to contain. Gran Torino landed beside Izuku. He was old, he was tired, he had been fighting villains since before Izuku's mother was born. His eyes were wet and he made no effort to address that fact. "You killed him," Gran Torino said. "Yes," Izuku said. The old hero was silent for a 3 count. His breathing was rough. His hands were shaking from the hit he'd taken earlier and from something else that had nothing to do with injury. "Good," Gran Torino said. Izuku looked at him. At the relief in the old man's face, at the decades of burden being set down behind those eyes. He nodded once. The news helicopters were already approaching. The footage would dominate every channel for a month. The world was about to learn what happened in Kamino Ward, and the world was about to understand, the way it had been slowly understanding since the sludge villain incident, that the rules had changed. The king had taken the field. The throne was his. And the thing that had been squatting in the seat for a century was gone. Shigaraki Tamura escaped Kamino Ward through Kurogiri's final gate. The Warp Gate villain had used the last of his operational capacity to pull his charge out of the district before the strike team could close the perimeter. One last act of the function he had been designed to serve. Kurogiri was captured in the aftermath. The Mist villain's body was secured in Tartarus within 48 hours, his consciousness trapped somewhere between the programming All for One had installed and the original person who had existed before the conversion. Shigaraki had nothing left. He sat in a safe house, one of 4 remaining, the others having been burned or compromised during the Kamino operation. The room was small. The furniture was cheap. There were 3 walls intact, and the 4th had a hole where his hand had rested for 2 seconds too long, the decay spreading outward in gray lines that ate through plaster and brick alike. He had lost his teacher. He had lost his army. He had lost his Nomu and his warp gates and his infrastructure and every single thing that had made him the leader of something, rather than the inheritor of nothing. He was, for the first time since All for One found him as a child on a street corner with a dead family behind him, alone. The rage was different now. Before Kamino, it had been hot, compulsive, external, aimed at the world that had wronged him. After Kamino, it was cold. It sat in his chest like a stone. It had a name, and the name was Izuku Midoriya, and the stone was heavy enough to make him forget to scratch. He had one resource remaining, the doctor. Garaki, the man who had built the Nomu for All for One, who had operated the medical facilities, who had maintained the production lines. Garaki had his own laboratory, his own projects, his own ambitions that had been funded by All for One's patronage but were not dependent on it. Shigaraki contacted him. The call lasted 4 minutes. The high end, Shigaraki said. Is it ready? It can be, Garaki said, but the target you're describing, I don't care what the target is. Build it. Deploy it. Pointed at him. Garaki was silent for a moment. And what will you do? I will watch. And when it's done, I will walk over what's left. 3 weeks passed. Izuku spent them at UA, attending classes, training, existing in the particular normalcy that his classmates had learned to treasure between the moments of intensity. The sports festival footage was still circulating online. The Kamino footage had been classified by the government, but leaked versions were everywhere. His face was the most recognized in the country that was not attached to a licensed pro hero. He did not care about recognition. He cared about the people around him, about the way Ida stood straighter each week, about the way Todoroki's fire burned with less conflict and more ownership, about the way Kirishima's hardening had evolved from surface-level resistance to something approaching genuine unbreakability. He cared about Momo, about the way her creation quirk was expanding beyond its previous limits because he had taught her material science principles from dungeons that operated on physics this world hadn't discovered yet. He cared about the small girl in Recovery Girl's medical wing. He had found Eri's name in the Rook 3 days after Kamino. The white birds clustered around a district address with a pattern that meant suffering, ongoing, chronic, inflicted. He had followed the trail for a week before the full picture assembled. The Shi Hasaikai, a Yakuza organization, a man named Kai Chisaki, a child being used as raw material for a weapon that erased quirks. He told Aizawa, he told Nezu. He gave them the address, the organizational structure, the names. He gave them one day to organize a response. Then he went through the wall. The Shi Hasaikai's compound was a fortress. 12 layers of quirk-enhanced security, motion detection arrays calibrated for hero speed movement, and a crew of 8 lieutenants, whose abilities were designed to interlock in defensive formations that covered each other's weaknesses. The compound had been designed to withstand a professional hero raid, multiple entry points covered, response protocols tested, fallback positions prepared. It was not designed for a king. Izuku hit the front wall in full ball equip at 2:47 a.m. The security system registered the breach. The alarm sounded for 3 seconds before the electromagnetic interference from Bal's passive field overwhelmed every electronic component in a 40-meter radius. Cameras died. Motion sensors went inert. Communication systems dissolved into static. He was inside. The first lieutenant found him in the entry corridor, a man named Tabe, whose quirk allowed him to consume and digest any material. He opened his mouth and lunged, and Izuku's palm hit his solar plexus with force that lifted him off the ground and deposited him in the wall behind his starting position. He did not get up. The second and third came together. Hojo and Setsuno, whose quirks combined into a barrier and theft formation that was supposed to strip weapons from approaching enemies while deflecting their momentum. Izuku's weapons were part of his body. The magoi flowing through his metal vessels could not be stripped because it was not held. It was flowing. Setsuno's theft quirk closed on nothing. Hojo's barrier met a Barak discharge and came apart. He moved through the compound at walking speed. This was important. He did not run. He did not rush. Every encounter was handled at the pace of someone who had done this kind of thing in structures far more dangerous and had developed a rhythm for it that prioritized completeness over urgency. Each lieutenant fell as they appeared, some in one hit, some in two, none in more than 5 seconds of sustained engagement. The compound's layout was labyrinthine, an intentional maze of corridors and false rooms and dead ends designed to confuse and exhaust intruders. Izuku's Rook showed him the path. The white birds gathered at junctions indicating which turn led deeper, which corridor led to the center. He followed them the way a man follows a map. He drew himself 8 lieutenants, each one trained, each one prepared for a hero raid. The last of them, Nemoto, whose quirk forced truth from anyone within range, attempted to stop Izuku with a question. "What is your weakness?" Nemoto shouted, his quirk activating, the compulsion reaching for Izuku's throat. Izuku kept walking. The compulsion hit his magoi barrier and was purified the same way blood curdle had been purified, the same way every external effect was purified when it entered the field of a man whose blood answered to the Rook alone. "I have many weaknesses," Izuku said, still walking, unbothered. "Beautiful women. Good tea. The sound of my partner's laugh when she thinks nobody is listening." He reached Nemoto. "Yours is that you brought a question to a fight that required an answer." His palm met Nemoto's chest. The lieutenant hit the floor. He found Eri. She was in a medical chamber on the compound's lowest level. A room of white tile and harsh light and monitoring equipment that measured things no child should be subjected to having measured. She was on a bed, small and pale, her white hair loose around her face, her red horn active, because her body had been in a state of terror for so long that the quirk operated on autonomic response rather than conscious activation. She looked at him in the doorway. Her eyes were red. Her face was empty in the way that children's faces become empty when they have been told so many times that help is a concept meant for other people, that they stop looking for it. Izuku reverted from Baal Equip. The scales vanished. The lightning faded. He was human again, just a boy in a coat with wild green hair and gold on his wrists. He knelt. He made himself smaller. He folded to her level with the same ease he had shown Ida in the alley, the same warmth, the same complete absence of performance. "My name is Izuku," he said. His voice was low and even. "I'm going to take you out of here. Nobody is going to hurt you again. You have my word as a king." Eri's lip trembled. Her eyes were fixed on his face with the particular intensity of someone trying to determine whether what they are seeing is real or another version of disappointment wearing a kind mask. He held out his hand. Palm up. Open. The gold bracelet on his wrist caught the room's harsh light and transformed it into something warmer. She reached for it. Then the ceiling opened. Kai Chisaki descended through the compound's upper structure with the ease of a man who could reshape matter with his touch, the flow of him reassembling behind his passage, the architecture of the building responding to him like clay. He landed 20 feet from Izuku and Eri with his gloves already removed and his coat settling around him like something formal. His mask was on. His eyes above it were the eyes of a man who had never once in his life been denied something he considered his property. "The dungeon boy," Chisaki said. His voice was even, conversational. "I have a file on you. Your power operates on Magoi, an organic energy field generated through physiological channels." His hands flexed. Fingers spreading, quirk ready. "Everything organic disassembles." Izuku stood. He stepped between Chisaki and Eri. The motion was smooth and unhurried, and placed his body as a barrier with the same naturalness as a wall being built. "You spent years using a child as a manufacturing component," Izuku said. "You extracted her pain like a resource. You filed it under progress. And now you stand in front of me and explain my biology to me as though understanding the mechanism gives you authority over it. His bracelets began to glow. You understand nothing about authority. Chisaki moved, he touched the floor. The entire sublevel of the compound came alive, walls reshaping, floor rising in spikes, the ceiling descending in sections meant to crush. The room became a weapon. The architecture became an extension of Chisaki's body. Every surface a threat, every angle an attack. The entire environment dedicated to dismantling the intruder through structural violence. Izuku touched his bracelet. Bal! The transformation raced the architecture. Blue scales formed as the first floor spike arrived, and the spike hit Izuku's scaled arm and the Magoi barrier underneath, and stopped. The second spike came from below. Lightning arced from Izuku's foot and traced the spike back to its origin point, traveling through the organic material Chisaki was using as conduit until it found the source. Chisaki lurched. The lightning had traveled his own architectural extensions and found his nervous system at the end of the chain. His hands pulled away from the floor. Reflex. Self-preservation. The spikes stopped. The ceiling stabilized. Izuku was already moving. Bal's physical enhancement pushed his speed past what Chisaki's reaction time could track. He closed the gap in a single stride, and his hands locked around both of Chisaki's wrists before the villain could spread his fingers. The overhaul quirk fired. Disassembly pulsed from Chisaki's palms, the force that had dismantled humans, that had rebuilt his own body, that had taken Eri apart and put her back together hundreds of times in the service of his ambition. It hit Izuku's Magoi barrier. The barrier held. The quirk found nothing to disassemble because Magoi existed in a state that was neither organic nor inorganic. A flow state, an energy form that occupied the space between physical categories. Chisaki's quirk required categories. It required material classification to function. Magoi defied classification. Chisaki's eyes went wide above his mask. His quirk fired again. And again. Each time hitting the barrier. Each time finding nothing. His hands were shaking in Izuku's grip, and his face behind the mask was doing something that the mask could not entirely hide. You built your entire empire on a child's pain, Izuku said. He held those wrists, and he looked at the man behind the mask, and he spoke with the weight of someone who had decided this ending before he walked through the wall. You will not be taking that pain anywhere else. He released one wrist and struck. His fist hit Chisaki's center mass with the full enhanced strength of a body that had survived 7 dungeons. The kind of force that reorganized internal architecture through sheer kinetic delivery. Chisaki left the ground. He traveled the full length of the chamber and hit the far wall with an impact that restructured the wall around his body. He did not get up. He did not move. His hands hung limp at his sides and his fingers did not twitch. Izuku reverted. He turned back to Eri. She was standing where he had left her. Her eyes were fixed on him. Her lip was still trembling. But something in her posture had changed. The smallest shift, the tiniest lean forward, as though she had watched what just happened and decided that maybe, this particular person's promises meant something. Izuku knelt again. He opened his arms. Eri ran. She hit his chest with the force of a child who had been alone for years and had just found, in the space of 3 minutes, someone who could stand between her and the thing that hurt her and win. Her small hands fisted in his coat, her face pressed into his shoulder. She was shaking. The full body shaking of stored terror being released. And she was silent because she had learned a long time ago that making noise brought attention and attention brought pain. Izuku held her, his arms folded around her small frame. His chin rested on top of her white hair. The rook settled around them both. The white birds that only he could see drifting lower, closer, their pattern shifting to something that meant protection. "You're safe," he said. "I've got you. You're done being afraid." He stood with her in his arms. She weighed nothing. She clung to his neck with the grip of someone who intended to never let go, and he carried her through the compound, back through the corridors, past the fallen lieutenants, through the hole in the front wall, and out into the night air. Outside, the pro-heroes had arrived. Ryukyu's agency. 3 heroes, including Ryukyu herself in her dragon form, had reached the compound's perimeter on official response timing. They found the front wall breached, The interior silent, the security completely offline, and a 17-year-old walking out through the structural damage carrying a sleeping child against his shoulder. Ryukyu, in her full dragon form, looked at the hole in the wall, looked at Izuku, looked at Eri. Her massive head tilted in the particular way that dragons tilt when they are processing something unexpected. "The paperwork for this," she said, her voice rumbling through her transformed throat, "is going to take me 6 weeks. "I'll write you a summary," Izuku offered. Ryukyu snorted. Smoke came out. She decided to do the paperwork later. The high end found Izuku on a Saturday. He was walking back from a bookstore in downtown Mustafu. The afternoon was warm, late summer heat settling into the streets, civilians moving at the particular slow pace of people who are urgent to be. He was carrying 2 books. One was a material science text that he planned to give Momo, a postgraduate volume on metamaterial composites that would expand her creation quirk vocabulary by approximately 40%. The other was a novel. He enjoyed novels. The memories of Sinbad's lifetime were rich with experience but poor in fiction, and Izuku had developed an appreciation for stories told by people who had never lived them. The shadow fell across the block at 3:17 p.m. Izuku's head turned skyward. The rook screamed. The white birds scattered in the pattern that meant predator, apex, engineered, incoming. The high end dropped from altitude like a meteor. Wingspan covering the street. Multiple quirks visible in its body. Strength enhancement in the bulging musculature, flight in the biological wings, regeneration in the tissue that was already repairing the heat damage from atmospheric re-entry. Its eyes, and it had eyes, real eyes, aware eyes, locked on Izuku with targeting precision that spoke of programming rather than instinct. Izuku set his books on a parked car. Gently. The material science text on the bottom, the novel on top. He straightened his jacket. Djinn of rule and submission. Focaler. The feathers erupted from his arms. His hair lengthened. His body lifted from the ground as the wind answered his form and carried him upward to meet the incoming threat at altitude. The high end adjusted its trajectory. It was fast. Faster than the standard Nomu. Faster than the version at USJ. Fast enough that their first exchange happened at a speed that the civilians below registered as a sound and a pressure wave rather than a visible event. The collision point was 200 meters above street level. The high-end's fist, carrying 4 combined quirks of physical enhancement, met Izuku's wind barrier, and the impact sent a shockwave downward that cracked every window on the block. The high-end pushed through. Its intelligence was real. It analyzed the wind barrier, identified the pattern, adjusted its next strike to come from the angle with the lowest resistance. Izuku let it learn. He was interested. 7 months of combat since he had walked out of the last dungeon, and nothing had required him to remain engaged for longer than a single exchange. The high end was different. Its adaptation speed meant that each technique became less effective after its first use, and its regeneration meant that even successful strikes needed to be absolute to matter. He ran it through 3 exchanges at the Focaler tier. The high end adapted to wind attacks after the second one. Its biological wings adjusted their membrane structure to resist cutting, and its body shifted density to reduce the effect of pressure differentials. It was learning in real time. "Good," Izuku said. He was hovering at altitude, feathers spread, watching the high-end reset after its 3rd failed approach. "You were built to adapt. Let's see how fast." Foraz Zora. The twin black tornadoes launched from his palms. The high-end's wings folded into a defensive configuration that redirected the wind shear. It had learned from the first exposure, adjusted its biology to compensate. The cutting edges of the tornado found reduced purchase on the altered membrane. The regeneration handled what damage did land. Izuku watched it regenerate, watched the cycle operate. The rewind effect. Eri's stolen data, her pain converted into this creature's resilience. His expression changed. The amusement faded. What replaced it was the expression he wore when something required ending. He let the high end land its best combination. Full output. Every quirk in its arsenal firing simultaneously. A coordinated strike that came from 3 angles at once and carried force that would challenge any hero in Japan. It hit him. The Magoi barrier absorbed it. His body moved back 6 feet from the impact. The first time in this entire fight that a strike had shifted his position, He stabilized, looked at the high end. It was preparing another combination, its intelligence reading his recovery as an opening. That is everything you have, Izuku says, a worthy effort from a weapon built by a man too afraid to hold one himself, but it was never going to be enough. Bale, the transformation layered over Focalor. Dual equip, 2 Djinn active simultaneously, their domains overlapping, their powers combining in ways that turned the sky above Musutafu into something that meteorologists would argue about for years. Foraz Zora met Bararok in the same attack. Microscopic wind cutting at the cellular level, while divine lightning overloaded the nervous pathways driving the regeneration cycle. The combination was a system kill. 2 simultaneous attacks targeting the same biological process from different vectors, faster than the adaptation could account for, because adapting to one made the other more effective. The high end came apart, layer by layer. Its regeneration fired once, twice, 3 times, each cycle shorter than the last, as the lightning burned the neurological framework that powered the rewind effect. The wind cutting continued through each regeneration attempt, preventing the accumulated damage from being addressed. The cycle broke. The regeneration stopped. What remained was fragments carried by wind that scattered them across the sky in pieces too small to reconstitute. Izuku reverted. He descended to the street. His boots hit the pavement beside the parked car where his books still sat, undisturbed. He picked them up, checked the corners. The material's science text was fine. The novel had a singed edge from the atmospheric pressure of his takeoff. Acceptable. Shigaraki stood at the end of the block. He was alone. His coat was the same one he'd worn at Kamino. The hands on his face were shaking, a fine tremor that made the fingers rattle against each other. He had come to watch. He had watched. Izuku turned to face him, 40 meters between them. The street was empty. Civilians had evacuated the moment the high end appeared, their survival instincts well developed after months of living in a city where large-scale combat had become semi-regular. "You came yourself," Izuku said, his voice carried down the empty street. "That is the first brave thing you have done since I learned your name." Shigaraki did not scratch. He did not twitch. He stood at the far end of the block with his arms at his sides and his eyes, visible through the gaps in the hand covering his face, fixed on Izuku with something that was past hatred, past rage, something that had gone through rage and come out the other side into a territory that did not have a name. "He built me for this," Shigaraki said. His voice was different than it had been in the bar, flatter, emptier. "Everything he gave me, the League, the Nomu, the plans, the hand, all of it was supposed to lead to me taking everything from the hero world, destroying it, rebuilding it as mine. And now he's gone," Izuku said. "And now he's gone, and the Nomu are gone, and the League is gone, and there is nothing left of any of it except me and this." He raised his right hand. 5 fingers spread. The air around them grayed as the decay quirk activated at maximum passive output. The pavement beneath his feet began to crack. "This is all I ever actually had, the only thing that was mine from the beginning." He moved. He was fast. The months of rage and loss had done something to his body. Sharpened it, compressed it, turned the aimless fury into focused motion. His hand reached for Izuku with all 5 fingers spread and decay at maximum cascade. Izuku stepped inside the reach. His palm covered Shigaraki's 5 fingers before they could make contact, wrapping around the hand from the front, catching the decay point of origin between his own palm and fingers. The Magoi barrier formed at the contact point, the same barrier that had stopped Overhaul's disassembly, the same purification that had nullified Blood Curdle. Decay met Magoi, and the 2 forces pressed against each other for 1 full second before Decay recognized something it could not decay and faltered. Shigaraki's hand went still. His eyes, wide behind the hand mask, looked at the place where his quirk had met its limit, where the one thing he believed was absolutely his had found something absolutely resistant. "Your entire life was a tool built by another man's ambition," Izuku said. He held those 5 fingers trapped against his palm, and he spoke with the weight of someone who had lived enough to understand what wasted potential looked like. "He handed you rage like a gift. He told you the world was wrong, so you would take it apart for him. And you accepted, because you were a child, and children accept what adults give them." His eyes were steady. You were a weapon, a tool with feelings, and the man who forged you is dead, and you are still swinging at targets he picked because you never learned to choose your own. Shigaraki's face, what was visible of it, did something complicated. A cascade of expressions that moved too fast to isolate. His mouth opened, Izuku struck. Clean. A single palm strike to the center of mass, carrying 7 Djinn worth of Magoi enhanced force, delivered with the finality of a sentence being completed. Shigaraki left the ground. His trajectory was short, 15 feet backward and up, then down, his body hitting the pavement with a sound that was conclusive. He did not get up. Izuku straightened his jacket, looked at his books, looked at the empty street, looked at the villain who had been the figurehead of everything that had tried to unmake the hero world for the past year. Rest, he said. It was the only kindness available. The police found Shigaraki on the pavement 11 minutes later. He was breathing. He was unconscious. He would remain unconscious for 6 days, and when he woke, he would be in Tartarus, and the hands that had covered his face would be in an evidence locker, and the life that All for One had constructed for him would be, in every meaningful sense, over. Izuku took his books and went home. The material science text was definitely fine. Momo was going to love it. Dabi's broadcast came on a Thursday evening. Every screen in Japan, television, phone, computer, public display, interrupted its programming simultaneously. The hack was comprehensive, professional, the work of someone who had been planning this for years and had invested the time to ensure that when the moment came, there would be no corner of the country that missed it. Dabi's face appeared. Patchwork skin, blue eyes that burned with their own light, a smile that carried the satisfaction of a man pulling the pin from a grenade he had been holding since childhood. My name is Dabi, he said. My real name is Todoroki. To my father is the current #1 hero, Endeavor, and I have something to show you. The broadcast lasted 18 minutes. It contained footage, medical records, family documentation, and testimony that dismantled the Todoroki family's public image with the thoroughness of a demolition crew working from blueprints. Every word was chosen for maximum damage. Every piece of evidence was arranged for maximum impact. Japan watched. Japan reacted. The reaction was nuclear, instantaneous, total, spreading through every level of society with the speed of information in a connected world. In the Class 1A common room, Shoto sat on the couch. The television was on. The broadcast was playing. His classmates were around him, some standing, some sitting, all watching the screen with expressions that ranged from horror to confusion to the specific helplessness of people who want to help but cannot identify how. Izuku was beside him. He had been beside him since the broadcast started. He had not spoken. He had not tried to manage the moment or soften what was being said. He was simply present, his shoulder against Shoto's shoulder, his body a fixed point in a room where everything else was shifting. The broadcast ended. The screen went to static and then cut to a news anchor who was clearly reading a script that had been written in the last 30 seconds. The common room was silent. Shoto's hands were clasped in his lap. His heterochromatic eyes were fixed on the static. His left side, the fire side, was cold. No warmth at all. The opposite of what he had achieved at the sports festival. A regression that spoke to the depth of what had just been detonated inside him. He's gone completely, Shoto said. His voice was flat. Yes, Izuku said. He was always going to do this. Yes. Silence held for another 10 seconds. Shoto's hands tightened against each other, then released, then tightened again. What do I do? He said. The question came out without inflection, a real question from a person who genuinely needed an answer. Izuku turned to face him fully. His eyes were the eyes of someone who had walked through this kind of revelation in another life, who had watched families tear themselves apart over inherited grudges and made choices about which pieces to carry forward and which to leave behind. You were not Endeavor's creation at the sports festival when you lit your left side for the first time, Izuku said. You are not Tuya Todoroki's wreckage now. You are Shoto. That was true before tonight, and it will be true after. What you do is the same thing you were already doing. You choose who you want to be. The broadcast changes the context. It does not change you. Shoto looked at him. The flatness in his expression cracked. Just slightly, just enough to show that something beneath it was still alive, still responding, still capable of hearing truth and processing it. You said that the same way you said it at the festival, Shoto said. Because it is still true. It will be true tomorrow. It will be true when you are 40 and this night is a memory. You are Shoto. Everything else is noise. Something in Shoto's posture eased. His shoulders dropped an inch, his hands unclenched. The fireside came back, a low warmth, steady, the pilot light of something that would burn brighter again when the initial impact had passed. Thank you, Shoto said. Izuku nodded. He did not tell Shoto the debt was paid. He did not say anything else. He just stayed beside him on that couch while the common room slowly released its held breath. And the class began to move again. Kirishima putting a hand on Shoto's other shoulder, Momo bringing tea without being asked, Ida standing nearby with the particular readiness of someone prepared to handle whatever came next. The class took care of each other. Izuku watched them do it and felt the satisfaction of a king whose people had learned to support each other without being told. Dabi made his move 3 days after the broadcast. The Hero Public Safety Commission building, a 12-story structure in central Tokyo that housed the administrative infrastructure of the entire Hero regulatory system. Dabi arrived at sunset with blue fire at maximum output and the specific intention of reducing the building to ash as a symbolic capstone to his public revelation. The flames were already climbing the building's facade when Izuku arrived. He dropped from the sky. Full focalar equip, feathers spread, wind answering, the atmospheric pressure shift announcing his presence before his body became visible. He landed between Dabi and the building with a downdraft that scattered the blue flame line like paper in a gale. The fire that had been climbing the walls was blown outward and dissipated against the wind barrier his landing generated. Dabi looked up. His expression was the one Izuku had seen in the forest. The specific look of a man who expected this, planned for this, and was in some way relieved by it. I knew you'd show up, Dabi said. His voice was rough, scarred, the way his skin was scarred, damaged by his own output, wearing the cost of his power on every surface. You always show up. Your brother watched that broadcast from a couch in a dorm room, Izuku said. His voice carried across the distance between them with the clarity that Focalar's wind domain provided, every word arriving without distortion. He sat through it and came out the other side intact. That has nothing to do with you and everything to do with who he became in spite of what your family went through. He looked at Dabi. The look contained no hatred. It contained no mercy either. It was the look of someone delivering a verdict. You made choices. They end here. Dabi's hands ignited. Full output. The blue fire erupted from both palms and climbed his arms and spread across his body until he was a pillar of flame in the evening street. Heat so intense that the asphalt beneath him was already softening, the air above him shimmering with thermal distortion. He gave everything. Maximum volume, maximum temperature. The fire spread from his body in a sphere that engulfed the entire block in blue-white heat, aimed at the building and at Izuku and at the world in general because Dabi's anger had never been precise. It had always been about burning everything, including himself, in pursuit of a statement that would outlast him. Izuku rose. Focalar's feathers carried him above the fire line. His hair streamed behind him, long and flowing in this form, catching the blue light of Dabi's flames and the gold light of his own metal vessels in equal measure. The wind gathered. The sky above answered the way it always answered. Clouds condensing, atmosphere compressing, the storm building with the same inevitability it had shown at Kamino. Bararak Inkrad Sai. The lightning blade formed in the thunderheads. It was the same technique that had ended All for One, the same divine authority, the same absolute scale. It hung above the district for 1 full second, visible, beautiful, terrible, and then it descended. Blue fire rose to meet it. Dabi threw everything upward, his life, his rage, his pain, his father's legacy, all of it converted to heat and hurled at the sky because he had nothing else left to throw. The lightning ate the fire. It was not a collision of equals. It was a river meeting a candle. The blue-white blade passed through Dabi's maximum output as though it were not there and continued downward with its full force intact and hit the pillar of fire that was Todoroki Tuya with the finality of a story reaching its last page. The impact was silent. The lightning was too fast for sound. One moment, Dabi was burning, and the next, he was on the ground, his fire extinguished, his body smoking, his consciousness somewhere very far from the surface. He was alive. Barely. His body was shutting down from the combined strain of his own maximum output and the divine lightning that had ended it. The paramedics would arrive in 4 minutes. They would stabilize him. He would survive. He would wake in a hospital bed with both arms restrained, and a legal process awaiting him that would take years to complete. The building was intact. The fire was out. The evening sky was already clearing, the storm dispersing as the power that called it released its hold. Izuku descended, his feathers folded. He landed on the street beside Dabi's unconscious form and looked down at the man who had tried to burn his family's sins into the public record and succeeded only in demonstrating that burning was all he knew how to do. "I hope you find something else," Izuku said. He said it to the unconscious man the way you say things to people who cannot hear them. Because the words need to exist, even if their intended audience is not currently able to receive them. The Hero Public Safety Commission made their approach the following week. A handler arrived at UA, polished, professional, carrying a briefcase and a prepared pitch about partnership and oversight and the mutual benefits of institutional cooperation. The meeting was held in Nezu's office. Tea was served. Nezu sat behind his desk with his small paws folded and his eyes tracking every word with the intention of someone cataloging ammunition for future use. The handler spoke for 12 minutes. The proposal was comprehensive: licensing, agency support, mission, allocation, media management, resource access. It was framed as an honor, as an opportunity, as the logical next step for someone of Izuku's demonstrated capacity. Izuku listened. His tea cooled in his hands. His expression remained pleasant throughout. The same face he showed everyone, the face that said he was present and attentive and would give you the respect of a full hearing before he gave you his answer. The handler finished, closed the briefcase, folded their hands, waited. Izuku set his tea down. He looked at the handler with the eyes of someone who had been a king in another life and remembered what it felt like when smaller institutions tried to subsume larger authorities. "I have conquered 7 dungeons that your commission classified as inaccessible," he said. His voice was warm. It was also immovable. "I resolved the sludge villain incident. I ended the USJ assault. I dismantled the Camino confrontation. I stopped the hero killer. I liberated a child from an underground criminal organization. I destroyed a weapon that your entire hero roster could not contain." He paused. Let the list settle. All of this without commission authorization, without commission resources, with outcomes your approved protocols could never have achieved. I killed all for one. The handler's mouth opened. "You came here to ask me something," Izuku continued, and his voice was still warm, but the warmth was the warmth of something large, a bonfire, rather than a candle, the kind that gave light and heat, but would burn you if you stepped too close. "And what you should have done is thank me for the answers I have already given you for free." The handler's mouth closed. Their hands tightened on the briefcase. Their eyes moved to Nezu, searching for support, for intervention, for the institutional authority that was supposed to back them in situations like this. Nezu sipped his tea. He offered nothing. The handler left. The door closed behind them with the soft click of a retreat that would be characterized as a strategic withdrawal in the eventual internal report. Nezu set his cup down. His smile was the specific one that appeared when something had played out exactly as he'd anticipated. "Beautifully handled," Nezu said. "I learned from the best," Izuku replied. "Who?" Izuku smiled. The smile of 2 lives, the smile of a king who had once built an empire from nothing and remembered every lesson that empire had taught him. "A king I used to be," Nezu laughed. Warm and genuine and delighted in the particular way of a genius who has found another genius worth sharing space with. Hawks found him at the UA observation deck 3 days later. The winged hero landed without invitation, folded his red feathers against his back, and produced 2 canned coffees from somewhere inside his jacket. He offered one to Izuku. Izuku took it. They stood at the railing together. The city spread below them in the late afternoon light. Golden, alive, humming with the particular energy of a place that had survived several apocalypses in the past year and was choosing to continue existing with characteristic stubbornness. "You're faster than I expected," Hawks said. His voice carried the relaxed quality of someone who had spent years operating at maximum tension and was only now learning what reduced tension felt like. "I had an operation running inside the PLF for 2 years. You covered the same territory in about 2 months. "I had better information," Izuku said. "I noticed." Hawks studied him, the sideways evaluation of a man who read people for a living and was reading this one with more attention than most. "What happens now? The League is done. All for One is done. The PLF is scattered. The Commission is annoyed with you, which I personally find entertaining. The hero world is going through a reckoning because the symbol of peace retired, and the thing that replaced the idea of a symbol is..." He gestured at Izuku with his coffee can. "I know," Izuku said. "Are you going to take the #1 spot? Because Endeavor stepped back, voluntarily, and the rankings are chaos, and every person in this country with a television knows who the actual answer is." Izuku drank his coffee. He looked at the city below with the eyes of someone who had defended it enough times that it felt like something he owned in the way that kings own territory, through investment rather than claim. "Rankings are for people who need external validation to know their own worth," he said. "I know my worth. I have known it since I walked out of the first dungeon carrying the weight of a life lived before mine." He looked at Hawks. "If being #1 helps accomplish what I intend to accomplish, keeping these people safe, keeping this country functioning, keeping the structures that protect children and families and communities intact, then I will accept the designation. If it becomes a cage, I will discard it the same way I discarded the Commission's leash." Hawks stared at him. The evaluation in his eyes shifted to something else, something that might have been relief or admiration or the particular recognition of one exceptional person acknowledging another. He laughed, genuine and a little breathless. "You know what? I think I'm going to like working in a world where you're the top of the food chain." Izuku raised his coffee can. Hawks clinked his against it. They drank in comfortable silence while the city caught the last of the afternoon light below them. Garaki's final project activated on a morning in late autumn. Dr. Daruma Ujiko, 80 years old, lifelong collaborator of All for One, architect of the Nomu program, the mind behind every engineered horror that had walked out of a laboratory in the past 4 decades, had one remaining project. He had been working on it in parallel to everything else, in a facility the intelligence networks had not yet found, with resources stockpiled during the decades of All for One's patronage. The Awakened was his masterwork. A Nomu variant that used data stolen from Ares' medical scans, the rewind effect of her Quirk, captured in bioelectric readings during the years in Habspy. Overhaul had kept her imprisoned to create a regeneration loop that did not heal damage, but reversed it. Combined with a shockwave quirk capable of leveling structures and 3 additional layers of physical enhancement, the Awakened was the apex of what Nomu engineering could achieve when its creator had nothing left to lose and a lifetime of expertise to apply. It was released in central Musutafu. The first indication was the sound, a shockwave impact that hit 2 buildings in the commercial district and turned their lower floors into rubble. The second indication was the screaming. Thousands of civilians in a dense urban environment discovering that something massive had appeared among them and was moving through their streets with the speed and destructive capacity of a localized earthquake. Pro-heroes on scene responded. Mount Lady, Death Arms, Kamui Woods. The first wave of response. The heroes who were always closest because their agencies were local, whose job it was to hold the line until the cavalry arrived. They could not hold the line. The Awakened moved through them the way Izuku moved through villain robots at the entrance exam, with the ease of something operating at a tier above its opposition. Its shockwave quirk cleared the heroes from its path. Its regeneration reversed the damage they managed to land. Whatever they removed came back. Whatever they destroyed returned. The cycle was visible. A pulse of light across the creature's body every time the rewind effect engaged, undoing seconds of accumulated damage in heartbeats. The city was evacuating. Sirens filled the air. The residential district was 2 blocks ahead of the Awakens' trajectory, and the heroes who should have been stopping it were scattered across the commercial zone, trying to stand back up. The Rook sang. Izuku arrived from the sky, full focolor equip. He dropped from above the cloud line at terminal velocity, feathers spread, the air below him compressed into a visible cone of distortion. He hit the street between the Awakened and the residential district, and the impact of his landing, the displaced air detonating against the asphalt, produced a shockwave of its own that stopped the creature's forward motion dead. He rose from the landing crouch. He looked at the Awakened. It was enormous, 3 meters tall. Wings that were vestigial but operational. Musculature that spoke of engineering rather than biology. And the regeneration visible as a constant golden pulse across its body. The rewind effect, cycling without pause, maintaining its form against every force applied to it. He watched the cycle operate. The pulse, the rewind, the return to form. He recognized what he was looking at. The data stolen from Eri, the child he had carried out of Overhaul's compound on his shoulder, the child who was currently in Recovery Girl's care, learning what safety felt like for the first time in her life. Her pain. Converted to a weapon. Again, the amusement left his face. What replaced it was the expression that preceded endings. "Your regeneration is borrowed," he said. His voice carried across the evacuated street with the clarity of absolute authority. It was taken from a child who earned it through years of suffering. You are wearing stolen time. His hands rose to his sides. The metal vessels, all 7 of them, began to glow simultaneously. Gold light poured from his wrists, his neck, his fingers, building in intensity with each passing second. I am returning it. The sky changed. Every metal vessel active at once, all 7 Djinn resonating in harmony. The atmosphere above Musutafu became something that weather systems had never produced. Thunderheads from Baal, wind currents from Focolor, absolute cold from Valifor, resonant frequencies from Zepar, all layering over each other in a convergence that turned the sky white with accumulated power. The Rook became visible. The white birds, always present at the edge of Izuku's perception, always invisible to everyone else, filled the sky above him in their millions. They were visible. To everyone. Every person on the street, every camera drone, every hero at the perimeter. They could all see the birds. White, luminous, moving in patterns that looked like celebration, like coronation, like the final act of a story that had been building since a 4-year-old boy had his first dream about a king. Izuku raised both hands. The power of 7 Djinn at full Magoi output, channeled through a body that had conquered 7 impossible labyrinths, powered by a soul that had ruled an empire in a previous life, amplified by the Rook of an entire city pouring its energy into the focal point of fate itself, condensed above his raised palms. What formed was beyond individual technique, beyond named attacks. It was the full expression of what a singularity could produce when the flow of fate aligned behind a single will. Lightning and wind and cold and sound and force combined into a convergence that had no category. A sphere of absolute authority that existed for the sole purpose of erasing what should never have been created. He released it. The convergence hit the Awakened at the speed of light and the force of a natural law being enforced. The creature's regeneration fired, the rewind effect pulsing, trying to reverse the damage, trying to recover, but the convergence operated faster than the cycle could calculate. Faster than time could be rewound. Faster than any biological process could respond. The Awakened stopped. The regeneration stuttered, fired again, failed. The creature's form, massive, engineered, built from decades of expertise and a child's stolen power, came apart under the weight of something it had no framework to resist. It ended. The white light faded. The Rook settled, the birds drifting back to their usual position at the edge of Izuku's vision, their pattern calm and satisfied and carrying the particular energy of completion. The sky cleared. Autumn sunlight returned to the street. Izuku lowered his hands. His metal vessels dimmed. He stood in the middle of a street that was clean, scoured by the passage of power, the asphalt smooth and faintly warm, the residential district behind him untouched. Every pro-hero on the perimeter was staring. Every civilian who remained was staring. Every camera drone, every news broadcast, every phone that had captured any fragment of what just happened, all recording the same image. A 17-year-old in flowing blue and white and gold, standing in the center of where a disaster had been, hands lowering from a position that just did what an entire response team could not. Mont, lady, at the perimeter in her giant form, sat down in the street, her enormous frame folded at the knees with the particular resignation of someone who had experienced this exact response before. "He did it again," she said. Present Meek, from the broadcast van 3 blocks away. "He always does it again." I know, it still does something to my brain every single time. Garaki's facility was 15 minutes away by flight. The Rook pointed directly to it, the white birds forming a line from the battle site to the laboratory where an 80-year-old man sat alone with his life's work destroyed and his patron dead and his masterwork scattered across a Musutafu street. Izuku flew. Focollar's feathers carried him above the city in the afternoon sun, casting a shadow on the streets below that civilians looked up at and recognized. The facility was underground, an access point in an industrial building that looked abandoned from the surface. Izuku entered through the front door because the security systems had been designed to repel hero raids, and hero raids did not typically consist of a single person walking through the door with 7 Djinn at his disposal. Garaki was in his chair. A laboratory chair, worn from decades of use, positioned at a console that displayed monitoring data for projects that no longer existed. His hands were on his knees. His shoulders were slumped. He was 80 years old and looked every year of it. He looked up when Izuku entered. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had expected this and had run out of the energy required to prevent it. "You found me," Garaki said. "I found everyone," Izuku replied. He crossed the laboratory, past empty containment units, past powered-down growth chambers, past the evidence of decades of work that had produced monsters for a monster. He stopped in front of the old doctor's chair. He looked down at him. "You spent 80 years building weapons for a man who treated human beings as raw material," Izuku said. "Every Nomu, every test subject, every augmented villain that walked out of a laboratory and into a fight they did not choose. You built them." His voice carried weight, but not rage. Not hatred. The weight of a verdict delivered by someone who had seen too much to indulge in emotion when efficiency was required. "You are going to tell me everything. Every facility still operating, every test subject still held, every project still running, every piece of information in that brain of yours that can be used to help the people you spent your life hurting." Garaki's hands were shaking on his knees. "And if I refuse?" Izuku looked at him. The look was answer enough. It contained everything that needed to be communicated about what refusal would cost and what cooperation would preserve. Garaki talked for 4 hours. Every word was recorded. Every facility was identified. Every test subject, 7 remaining across 3 locations in Japan, was pinpointed. Izuku sent the information to Nezu, to Aizawa, to the people whose job it was to turn intelligence into rescue operations. The subjects were recovered within 48 hours. The facilities were shut down. The final remnants of All for One's infrastructure were dismantled with the thoroughness of a king clearing his territory of threats. It was the best available outcome. Izuku took it without complaint because he had lived a life that taught the difference between the ideal outcome and the useful one, and the useful one saved more people. 3 months passed. The world had time to process. 3 months of news cycles running the same footage. 3 months of government debates about licensing reform and oversight restructuring, and the fundamental question of what the hero ranking system meant in a world where the person who actually resolved the most crises declined to be numbered. 3 months of a country learning, slowly, with the particular pace of large institutions encountering paradigm shifts, that the old frameworks were inadequate and new ones were required. The Hero Commission, after extended internal discussion that sources described as contentious, officially extended a provisional hero license to Izuku Midoriya. The offer was delivered by a handler who was markedly more deferential than the previous one. The handler did not bring a briefcase of constraints. The handler brought the license and a short speech about the Commission's respect for his contributions and their hope for continued collaboration. Izuku accepted the license. He slid it into his jacket pocket with the same ease he did everything, as though the formality was pleasant but unnecessary, as though the title was something he was accepting for the convenience of others rather than for his own benefit. Endeavor had stepped back from active hero work. The Todoroki Tuya revelation had landed on him with the full weight of a truth he had spent years unconsciously expecting. He had not collapsed. He had not vanished. He had done something harder. He had stayed. Stayed in his house. Stayed in his role as a father. Stayed in the uncomfortable space of a man who was trying to understand, at a pace that was not fast but was genuine, what repair looked like when you were the one who had caused the damage. Shoto visited him twice in 3 months. The visits were short, 20 minutes, 30 at most. They were harder than anything Shoto had done in the entire year up to them, harder than the sports festival fire, harder than watching Dabi's broadcast. The hardness of sitting across from someone you have complicated feelings about and choosing to be there anyway. After the second visit, Shoto found Izuku at the UA training field. Izuku was running Magoi circulation exercises, his body still, his vessels glowing in rotation, the Rook moving around him in training patterns. He opened his eyes when Shoto approached. "The visits are necessary," Shoto said. He said it the way he said everything, direct with minimal preamble. "I know," Izuku said. "They are also terrible." "I know that too." Shoto was silent for a moment. His hands were in his pockets. His breath fogged in the early morning air, both sides contributing equally, the fire warming one plume but just the ice cooling another. "Thank you for the sports festival," he said. Izuku smiled. "Rule yourself. That's thanks enough." Shoto nodded. He turned and walked back toward the dormitory building. 30 seconds later, Izuku's phone buzzed. A text from Shoto, a single thumbs-up emoji, nothing else. Izuku stared at it. He laughed, real and warm and full of the particular affection that comes from knowing someone well enough to find their minimum viable communication endearing. Ida was running his internship at a mid-size agency in the Hosu area. He had changed. The change was visible in his posture, in the way he held space, in the particular quality of his presence that had shifted from rigid to grounded. The precision was still there. It would always be there, because precision was his nature. But it was tempered now by something warmer, something that remembered an alley and a shoulder to lean on and the words that met him there. He and Izuku talked twice a week, phone calls that lasted 40 minutes on average. Izuku made Ida explain something he had learned during the week, a technique, a principle, a tactical observation from patrol, and then disagreed with at least one element. They argued about hero theory with the enthusiasm of two people who cared about the subject and enjoyed the friction of opposing viewpoints. Izuku usually bought the coffee at their in-person meetings. Ida always protested. Izuku always won. Kirishima had gotten stronger, the kind of stronger that comes from internal drive rather than external application. The strength of a person who has watched someone operate at a level they want to reach and chosen to run toward it rather than be intimidated by it. His hardening had evolved from surface-level resistance into something approaching true unbreakability. Layers of reinforcement that went deeper than skin, deeper than muscle, approaching the kind of full-body fortification that could withstand impacts his younger self would have crumbled under. He approached Izuku one morning before class. Direct. Earnest. The particular straightforward quality that was his entire brand. "I want to get stronger," Kirishima said. His shark-toothed grin was present but measured. This was serious, and he wanted it read as serious. Strong enough to be useful in the kind of fights you're in. "I know the gap. I see the gap every day. I'm telling you so you know I'm working on closing it." Izuku looked at him, at the set of his jaw, at the calluses on his hands from daily training, at the determination in his eyes. That was not the desperation of someone trying to prove themselves, but the steady fire of someone who had already decided what they were becoming and was simply communicating the timeline. "I know, Kirishima," Izuku said. "You already are." Kirishima went still, his grin faded, his eyes went wide. 3 full seconds of silence, which for Kirishima was unprecedented. His mouth worked. Then the grin came back at double intensity and his eyes were wet and he was absolutely crying and absolutely refusing to acknowledge it. That's really, okay, I'm going to train so hard you're going to regret saying that." "I never regret the truth." Izuku said. Kirishima punched him in the shoulder. It was the hardest he could hit. It moved Izuku approximately 0 inches. They both grinned. Bakugo did not talk about any of it. He trained. He competed. He won, consistently and impressively, his skills sharpening with a focus that had evolved from blind rage into something that looked, from a distance, almost like discipline. He did not acknowledge the gap between himself and Izuku in any verbal form. He did not mention Kamino, the forest camp, or any of the incidents where Izuku's intervention had changed outcomes that would otherwise have included him on the casualty list. But Class 1A had noticed something. In every situation where he was present, training exercises, combat drills, the moments between moments when people revealed their actual positioning through unconscious body language, Bakugo placed himself slightly to the left and slightly behind. Not following, never following, available, present, occupying the flanking position that tactical formations assigned to the strongest wing, the position that covered the vanguard's blind side, that handled what came from the angle the point could not see. Nobody mentioned it to him. Nobody was stupid enough to mention it to him. But they all saw it. Izuku saw it. He said nothing about it for 3 months. And then, on a morning in early spring, he set a book on Bakugo's desk before class started. A dense volume on tactical formation theory, advanced material, postgraduate level, like the kind that moved past individual combat and into coordinated multi-unit deployment. Bakugo stared at the book. His jaw tightened. His palms crackled, once brief, reflexive. He looked up at Izuku's retreating back as the other boy walked to his own desk. He did not say anything. He read the book in 3 days. He never returned it. Spring arrived. The campus bloomed. Cherry trees along the main path reached full flower, their petals catching the wind and drifting across the walkways in clouds of pink and white. The year was ending. The first year, the year that had contained more history than most decades. Class 1A had entered UA as strangers and was leaving it as something else. Something with a center. Something with a king. Izuku sat on the east roof with Momo. The east roof was theirs. They had found it 3 weeks after the sports festival, the smaller one, the one nobody used because it faced the wrong direction for the sunset. Its view was of the residential district instead of the mountains, and Izuku had chosen it because looking at the people he protected was better than looking at scenery. Momo was reading. A materials science journal, one of the ones Izuku had introduced her to, postgraduate level, the content expanding her quirk vocabulary in ways that showed up in training as objects of increasing sophistication and power. She read the way she did everything, with complete absorption, her posture perfect, one leg tucked beneath her on the rooftop surface. The gold bracelet was on her wrist. The star pin was on her collar. She had worn them every day since he gave them. They were part of her the way his metal vessels were part of him. Present, constant, carrying meaning that did not require explanation. You're thinking, she said. She did not look up from her journal. I'm always thinking. You're thinking loudly. She turned a page. Tell me. He looked at her, at the pin, at the bracelet, at the way the afternoon light settled on her like it had been placed there by someone who understood composition. I was thinking, Izuku said, about the fact that I conquered 7 dungeons across 2 years, and each of them contained trials that would have broken anyone else who attempted them. I walked through fire and ice and sound and wind and things that have no names in any modern language. I came out the other side carrying the power of ages and the certainty of someone who knows exactly what he is. Momo's page-turning slowed. And then I walked into an orientation hall, Izuku continued, and sat down next to you, and for approximately 15 seconds I had to actually think about what to say. He said it with the particular warmth of a confession, something held privately and now offered. 15 seconds of genuine uncertainty. The first I had experienced since I walked into the first dungeon at 14. You generated more doubt in me in those 15 seconds than 7 labyrinths full of ancient monsters. Her journal was forgotten. She was looking at him with full attention. Her composure present but thin, the way it always became thin around him. The barrier she had spent months learning to stop reinforcing, because the person on the other side of it had earned the right to see what was behind it. 15 seconds, she said. It felt longer. It probably looked longer. He laughed. She laughed with him. The sound of it, two voices together on a rooftop with nothing around them but sky and city, was the sound of something complete. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He set something between them on the roof surface, a ring. Gold. Simple in band, elegant, because simplicity was its own form of elegance. A 7-pointed star set into the metal, the same motif as her pin, the same design that had become their symbol through repetition and intent. He did not perform the moment. He did not build to it with preamble or frame it with drama. He was Izuku Midoriya, and he said exactly what he meant because anything else was a waste of time that could be spent meaning things. I have lived more than one lifetime, he said. I know what it means to rule a kingdom and build something from nothing and stand at the top of a world alone. I know what the alone part feels like. I remember it across lives. The weight of a crown without someone to share the weight with. The view from the top without someone to describe it to. He looked at her. I want this lifetime to be different. I want this version of the story to have you in it. And I want that ring on your finger because it belongs there the same way the bracelet belongs on your wrist and the pin belongs on your collar, because I gave them and you accepted them, and each one was a step toward this. Momo looked at the ring, her hand, the hand that created weapons and shields and tools of stunning complexity, the hand that had been steady through combat and training, and every test UA had placed in front of her was absolutely still. Her eyes were full. The composure that she had spent the entire year learning to lower around him was absent. What remained was her, brilliant and warm and certain. This is very forward, she said. Her voice was composed. Her eyes were not. I conquered 7 dungeons, Izuku said. I have a high tolerance for risk. She picked up the ring. She held it between her thumb and forefinger. She studied it, the band, the star, the craftsmanship, with the same analytical attention she gave everything. Then she slid it onto her finger. She watched it settle against her skin. She looked at how it caught the afternoon light. Then she looked up at him, and whatever had been holding her composure in place let go. Her face softened. Her eyes warmed. The smile that came was unguarded and true, and carrying the full weight of months of falling and choosing and deciding and arriving at this exact point. You are the most dramatic person I have ever met, she said. And yet here you are. And yet here I am, she agreed. He reached forward and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. His hand rested against her face, warm, steady. The hand of someone who had held weapons and power, and the fate of cities, and now held something that mattered more than all of them combined. She leaned into his palm with the ease of someone who had stopped resisting this particular force a long time ago, and was content in the surrender. Below them, the UA campus hummed with activity. First-year students finishing their final day. The sounds of a community that had been built and tested and survived, and was now celebrating the fact of its continued existence. Somewhere in the building, Jiru almost certainly knew. Her earphone jacks picked up everything within range, and the east roof was within range. And she had been waiting for this moment with the particular patience of someone who had watched the entire arc and wanted the resolution. She was almost certainly telling Ashido. Ashido was almost certainly producing sounds that would register on seismic equipment. Kirishima was almost certainly slamming his fist on something and calling it manly. Bakugo was almost certainly staring at a wall. The city spread beyond the campus in every direction. A city that had fewer monsters in it tonight than it did a year ago. A country that had been forced to evolve its understanding of what a hero could be and what power could look like when it was wielded by someone who did not need permission to use it. A world that was learning, slowly, the way worlds learn, through evidence rather than argument, that something had changed at the fundamental level, and the change was here to stay. The Rook drifted at the edges of Izuku's vision. The white birds moved in a pattern he had seen once before, in the first dungeon, on the day he completed it, the day he walked out carrying the weight of Baal's vessel and the certainty of a man who had just proven that the world's assessment of him was wrong. The pattern meant completion, fullness, arrival at a point the flow had been building towards since before his birth in this lifetime. He looked at the sky above the campus. He looked at Momo, at the ring on her finger. at her eyes that were looking back at him with everything she had. He looked at the city below, where his people were living the lives he had fought to preserve. At the campus, where his classmates were becoming what they were always going to become, because the right gravity existed nearby to keep them on course. He smiled. The smile of a man who had walked into an impossible labyrinth at 14 because the world told him he was worthless, and he decided to prove the world wrong by conquering the things it was too afraid to enter. The smile of a man who had carried the soul of a king across the boundary between lives and used it to build something in this world that the previous one had lacked. The smile of someone who had found the thing worth more than 7 Djinn and 7 dungeons and the power to reshape the sky itself. And it was sitting beside him on a roof in the late afternoon with a gold ring on its finger and a smile that matched his own. Momo leaned against his shoulder. His arm settled around her. The spring air carried cherry petals across the roof in lazy spirals that the rook might have been responsible for. The white birds playing with the wind, creating beauty because beauty was what the moment called for. "What comes next?" Momo asked. Her voice was soft. The journal was closed. The future was an open question she was asking because she wanted to hear his answer. Izuku looked at the horizon, at the city that was his, at the world that was reshaping itself around his presence, whether it was ready or not. "Everything," he said. "Everything comes next." The rook sang above them. The city hummed below. The ring caught the light. And the king held his queen on a rooftop in spring, while the future arranged itself into something that looked from every angle like exactly what it was supposed to be. He was Izuku Midoriya, the High King Reborn, the first-class singularity, the boy who walked into impossible labyrinths at 14 and walked out of 7 of them at 16, carrying the power of ages and the will to use it. He had conquered dungeons and villains, and the idea that he was worthless and the concept that power required permission. He had conquered fear and hate, and the systems that tried to leash what could not be leashed. And now on this roof, with this ring, with this woman, with this city and this life and this version of the story that contained everything the previous one had lacked, he had conquered the one thing Sinbad never had. He was home. And the flow of fate did not happen to kings. It was something they directed.
The hero roster. A massive salute to the legends backing this journey. Your support is what keeps the momentum at an all-time high and the dream moving forward. You guys are the absolute best. Pro heroes. The elite front line, stepping up and setting the pace for the whole community. DA, Fire 05. Symbol of peace. The pillars of the community, the titans who keep our foundations solid and the hype at an all-time high. Alexander Igarza, That Guy Miso, Deck, Lydell Scott Jr., James Martin, Victor Laroux, Rune Brokstad, Ariuse Bryant, Jonah Wheeler, T-Mac, XXHJRX3A7XX, Hyperbeams, Michael Murphy, Grand Region Kell, Sin Hunter, Logan Bland, Alexander Johannes, Alex Morgan, Ray Various, That Other Guy Too, Chad Reynolds, T. Mackie 68 Rimuru, A. Zetros, Dweller of the Deepest Depths, Lone Wolf, Jacob Ropes, Bully Maguire Shadow, Rathakit Thitiratnun Thakul, Neostar Productions, Asael Cardenas, Shaquan Simmons, Thunder, Sunawin 631, Elijah Saunders, Peter Hamilton, Freddie Rose, Omega, Akuma Noakami, Remorsefuls, Blackvein, Joshua Hedrington, Aaron Abercrombie,
Drift SK8ER, Corey Tokars, Jan, Devin Black, Crow, Joe Bros, Ray Von Crimson River, Dante Alastor, Adam Yonkers, Blood Saints, Donna Cafe, Zeph, KC, Howie60, Ignacio.
Hope of the universe, the ultimate guardians, celestial tier supporters whose impact literally shines across the galaxy. Void Rot, Chaos Umbre, Noroi Uzumaki Uchiha, Tyshawn Palmer, Coldbane 4, The Maniac 563, Debs, LS Morningstar, Marl, Spintown, I Shoot X50, Greg Green, James, Q Hon Yen Thompson, Juan, and Zeno KJ. And that's the epic tale of Izuku Midoriya, the king reborn who conquered 7 dungeons, shattered every villain in his path, claimed his throne, and built a future brighter than anyone dreamed. From absolute domination to heartfelt moments with Momo and his friends, this story is pure inspiration. Thanks for watching. If you loved this What If, smash that like button, subscribe for more epic stories, and drop a comment. Who's your favorite moment? See you in the next one.